Conversation.
There is only darkness. I must be dead, and yet I still think. So, therefore, I am Cogito ergo sum.
What? Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Mitchell Wolfe.
Hey, and Mitchell, we have a lot to get through on this one. So, you know what? I'm just going to dive into it. We're going to get through the due diligence. We're going to make this quick this time, I promise. Because people have been saying, Hyle, your show is too long. And I said, well, what should I do? And they said, go faster. So that's what I'm going to try to do.
That's probably pretty good. That's good advice.
Yeah. It's good advice. Good advice. Best advice I've gotten in a while. So, DK Vine, we are on Patreon. If you like the site, if you like the conversation, please think about throwing us a few coins every month. dkvine.com/Patreon, especially this time of year, helps support coverage at E3, because I'm going to be at E3, and Mitchell, you're going to be at E3 with me.
I will be at E3, yeah.
Yeah, we have to book lodging soon. That's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm really scared of it.
I'm terrified of doing it. So, yeah, I know I said I was going to go quick, but it's already antidote time. I booked my plane tickets last week, and I've been putting off doing that because even that just terrifies me. Like, I wish I had people to do this for me because I hate doing this stuff, making travel arrangements. It's just... It's a source of constant anxiety and stress, and I can't, like, relax until I'm through airport security, and I know that, like, they're not going to find any weaponry on me, because I don't know what I'm capable of, so it's just...
Yeah.
I feel better booked the plane tickets, but booking lodging, which is, for us, on our budget, means an Airbnb... that's always a source of stress. And we've lucked out the past 2 years. The Party House was a good establishment. And Koreatown last year wasn't bad. But for our plans this year, it's going to be a unique living arrangement. And that's all I'll say about that. Because we have at very least 3, potentially 4 people in the DK Vine realm, in the team this year. Obviously, you're going to be out there for Super Jump as well. Jeff is going to be out there for Golden Sands blog post. But all I'm saying, the DK Vine family, and we're gonna have to be sleeping in bathtubs, in trash bins, in the stove, maybe the oven. I don't really know how this is gonna work, but it will make for some fun video content at the very least. Just live stream us sleeping on Twitch.
I'm not
anyway.
against it. What I'm really upset about with the whole getting lodging and everything, and I know this is like, come on, Mitchell, just be an adult, and like, yeah, fine. But every bit that we spend thinking about, for you guys get flying down, and for me picking you up from the airport, and then for everyone else just like making sure that our Airbnb is reserved and paid for and big enough and everything, like all of that stuff is in addition to the planning that we have to do to actually like do E3. All of that is just like the preliminary requirement to get in the door to all of the games and press conferences and interviews that if we're gonna do, we need to plan it around the same times. It's so much of like hurrying up and then waiting and then hurrying up and then waiting. It's really frustrating. Of course, I'd prefer doing it all and going to E3 over not. And I'm still very happy that we get to. So it makes me feel a little like spoiled complaining about it.
What are we complaining about here?
Yeah.
But it's true. And because we work for smaller media outlets, much smaller media outlets, our own startups and various other organizations, we have to be a lot scrappier because we have to kind of claw our way through because the big guys get stuff handed to them by E3.
Yeah, everything we do is like it's followed by us making an argument for why we even deserve to be there.
Right. So, at the very least, we're in, and I'm flying out there. Whether or not I'll be sleeping in a dumpster remains to be seen. But anyway, you can document that, our sleeping arrangements on social media. So please follow DK Vine on Facebook and Twitter. Also, subscribe on YouTube. You can just find us by typing in DK Vine, all three. And do whatever you can to help us get Nintendo President Shintaro Furukawa on the podcast for the big spotlight episode for Mario Golf, Game Boy Color, this October. He's a big fan of RPG golf, Mitchell, so I don't think it's that big of an ask to get him on the conversation for, I think, the first big RPG golf game, at least in the West. So
yeah, I think that's probably fair.
But
I can just ask him next time I see him.
All right. Yeah, I would appreciate. I mean, that would make this whole process a lot easier. When I was talking about being scrappy and having to claw our way through, getting Nintendo President Shintaro Furukawa on the podcast for the big spotlight episode for Mario Golf, Game Boy Color, this October was really what I was thinking of.
Yeah. I have no idea if he speaks English or not, but
he does.
He does.
That's the whole reason I'm pursuing this. Yeah, the only reason
that is a good reason. Yeah.
The only reason Mr. Miyamoto has not been on the show yet is because his English is basically non-existent. So you know,
I know he keeps asking too. It's getting annoying.
I know. So I'm trying to, bone up on my Japanese, but it's a process, Mitch. It's a process.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody has found the missing episode of the Kongversation Season 6 yet. This is just a reminder that if you find it, the first person to do so needs to add us on Twitter, and they will get an autographed copy of the Sea of Thieves #1 comic book, signed by author Jeremy Whitley. And Mitchell, this is a cloud over the whole endeavor of the conversation that nobody has found this episode yet.
Well, I found it, but I am not eligible.
You found it because you had help.
I kind of had help. Yeah, it was more or less spelled out for me.
And just so people are aware, that I'm aware, we do know we need to do upcoming conversations about Donkey Kong Jungle Beat director Yoshiaki Koizuma's infamous quote about the rare characters not being fresh enough for his game. That turns out it was a mistranslation in 2005. And we ran a story about it on DK Vine itself, but it'll probably be a while before we can get around to fully addressing it here on the conversation. But just so you're aware, we are aware. And also, Greg Mayles might have been running around all this time in Sea of Thieves as Captain Blackeye. So that's a whole thing. So we'll get to that when we get to it, as well as Conker's other bad day information that Chris Seaver released. The episode about his new game, Rusty Pup. Of course, we've got a 2-parter Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle episodes we've got to get through. Oh my God, we've got so much to do, and E3 is coming right up. And
yeah, it sounds stressful. I don't want to do any of it.
Oh, I know. I was going to have you on one of the Rabbids episodes, Mitchell, but I don't even know at this point. My hand is trembling. This is too much. Something's going to have to get pushed back. Chris Alcock's book. Poor Chris Alcock. We have not even talked about his Sea of Thieves novel. We've got the anniversary update that's out that has like 3 big new modes in it. Oh, God. And we're doing a 2-parter Yooka-Laylee developer commentary episode? What is this?
Yeah, I don't know why this is taking precedent, to be honest. But
because it was first, and I had already started compiling the notes when like 3 other news stories broke. So
Mario and Rabbids was definitely first.
Okay, but to be fair, I didn't get the physical edition of that until recently because I couldn't get the physical edition that had Donkey Kong on the cover, or at least his name on the cover, until recently when it was only available at Costco in the US. So, Mitchell, I follow the beat of my own drummer, and that drummer is, of course, on the DK bongos. So please don't judge me. I'm getting through this wild and woolly world as best I can, just as you are.
The Mario and Rabbids episode has kind of been like Lindsey Buckingham on that Saturday Night Live skit. You know the one. 3 people out there know the one I'm talking about. It's fine. They loved that reference.
I know who Lindsey Buckingham is. I know what Saturday Night Live is, but I don't know what you're talking about.
It's fine. It's not that important. Don't worry about it. So these Yooka-Laylee developer commentaries.
Yeah, so let's get some historical context here. So, Mitchell, do you remember in the early days of DVD, when that was a new format of replacing VHS?
Barely.
When every major or minor release usually had a commentary track on it. And this was a hugely important thing for fans of whatever work it was, usually nerds like me who like to get some insight into how it was made, because that's the fascinating part for me is, oh, I really like this thing. What went into making it? And when I was like more in college, this was something I would do, is just binge DVD commentaries. And one of the like reasons I became a fan of something like Futurama as much as I did at the time were because of those DVD commentaries. That was one of the biggest reasons to buy those sets, because they were just entertaining in their own right. Hearing the cast and crew basically shoot the shit, just making jokes and cracking wise with each other, and also talking about what went into each episode. And I mean, even the stupid college TV show that Chad and I did together, we made commentaries on our shoddy DVDs that no longer work because Chad went for the really cheap blank DVDs when we were ordering stuff for our sets. But even those had commentaries on all the episodes, because that's how much it was expected back then. And then streaming became a thing, and we lost out on this aspect of modern entertainment that was pretty ubiquitous in the first decade of this century. It was everywhere, and now it's nowhere, and you just stream everything, and you don't know what went into the making of this episode of The Office. It's just on Netflix.
Yeah, I haven't made that connection between that and streaming, but you're totally right. That is where that happened.
Well, luckily, Playtonic recently revived the concept, however briefly. It was a promised Kickstarter stretch goal that they finally made good on. As somebody who makes a lot of promises and then takes forever to follow through on them, I can relate. But
there's something very comfy and familiar about that.
Yeah, there is. It's like, oh, thank God, and because this is a company that has their act together. They're actually professionals, and I'm fighting with E3 just to get in. But they finally got around to recording them, and they just completed them a couple of weeks back, hence this episode, because I was like, well, we could talk about them as they go on, but that would like fill up 7 individual episodes of the Kongversation, and I don't want to do that. So let's just wait till they're all done and talk about them in one big chunk. So that's what we're doing. It's honestly similar, or a little similar, to what Chris Seaver did with his Conker's Bad Fur Day commentaries that he did on YouTube. But when he did those were more, I think, like a decade and a half after the game had already come out. So you would get a lot of integral details that were just misremembered or lost to the sands of time. And the cool thing is Yooka-Laylee is still fresh in everybody at Playtonic's mind, because even when they were recording these, they were still working on things like the 64-bit tonic, and who knows what else might be coming out for the game, because that inept in Galleon Galaxy is still counting up to something. I think he's at 99% now, so
it truly is a mystery. But I'm glad that we have these commentary tracks, if not to get more specific Yooka-Laylee content, more content in the world of Yooka-Laylee and the world of Playtonic's efforts in general.
Content and context. I said context because my mind is so wired to take the word con or the suffix con and turn that into context.
You have poop brain is what you have. That's poop brain.
I do. Yeah, definitely poop brain. So we won't be discussing every individual aspect of these commentaries. Do not worry, because I realize how stupid it is having a commentary for commentaries. That's the dumbest thing the show has potentially ever done. So don't think of this episode or the next episode as a replacement or an alternative to watching these commentaries. It's simply us commenting on and dissecting, I think, the most interesting bits found in them, what we've learned about Yooka-Laylee as a result. So I've likened it in the notes here to an after-dinner mint to their 7-course meal. So just an after-dinner mint that probably lasts a total of 6 hours, and that we keep shoveling in your mouth. But
it lasts exactly as long as the meal.
Yeah, with more calories, but at least your breath will be minty fresh.
And so much more filler. Just so much more. Like, you're eating napkins in this one.
This is, absolutely. So for the full experience, I do recommend you listen to these commentaries first, and just listen to for your own amusement. Like, forget about the conversation, which is why I'm a good content creator, because I immediately tell people to turn off what we're doing. It's worth it just for the amusing back and forth and endless bickering with the Playtonic staffers. So you can find them on Playtonic's YouTube channel, but I couldn't find a handy shorthand URL for it. I looked, I couldn't find one. Even Playtonic's YouTube channel doesn't seem to have a shorthand like youtube.com/Playtonic Games or whatever. It didn't work. So since they don't have one, I've set one up for you for your convenience. Can be found at dkvine.com/here are the Yooka-Laylee developer commentaries, since Playtonic doesn't have a convenient shorthand URL for it, but apologies if they do, and we missed it. And once again, that's dkvine.com/here are the Yooka-Laylee developer commentaries, since Playtonic doesn't have a convenient shorthand for it, but apologies if they do, and we missed it. So helping them out there, you're welcome. You're welcome, Playtonic.
It's convenient.
And as we mentioned, this episode will be split up into 2 parts. So this one will cover the first 4 videos up through the 3rd world of the game, Moody Maze Marsh. And we'll start up with Capital Casino next week. Although if this runs long, we will probably cut out Moody Maze Marsh and start the next episode with it. We'll see how long-winded we actually get. And I realized it was going to be 2 parts late in the process. I reached out to you a couple days ago, Mitchell, and I said, hey, remember when you agreed to be on this episode with me? Well, funny thing about that, it's going to take 2 weeks now. My note taking was so diligent that I had 50 pages of notes for these commentaries. 50 pages.
That's 50 more pages than I took. That's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's after I had already watched them once, just for my own entertainment when each one came out. So I realized I really should have taken notes the first time. When I complain about my E3 workload, it's this inefficiency that really contributes to it. So, whoops. But as a result, I've listened to all of these twice, and the voice of my conscience, the voice inside my head, now sounds like Playtonic studio head Gavin Price. And it's telling me to do bad things. So another benefit of doing these episodes, though, is it will allow us to reflect on where we are with Yooka-Laylee 2 years after its release. And that's specifically the reason I wanted you on this episode, Mitchell, because this seems impossible, because at this point it feels like we've actually been friends for ages now, but you stumbled into our community due to your interest in Yooka-Laylee. I believe it was our interview with Chris Sutherland back in 2015 that caused you to find
2015.
us. Yeah,
it's been over 4 years now.
And then we actually met each other at E3 2015 and just went from there.
That really seems like too long ago. It doesn't seem like
too long ago. See, I feel like I've known you for a decade now. I feel like we're war buddies. We were in the trenches together.
I feel it's weird. It's a conflicting sort of thing. I feel that we've known each other, and I've been privy to certain DK Vine goings-ons for goings on, for maybe forever, and just because I've always loved Banjo-Kazooie, and I just happen to have never really found like a fan base for it. That of course I would have known these people forever, but I guess I didn't really 4 years. But at the same time, 2015 now to me sounds like forever ago.
Well, it basically is. These last few years have just... Time has slowed down again. It feels like when I was back in elementary school, and, each year would feel like a super long time.
Right.
That's the way time has slowed down in these past few years. And not for any good reasons either.
I think it's Nintendo's fault. I think it's Nintendo's fault because they've made the Wii U sound like such a long time ago.
Yeah, basically they mentioned the Virtual Boy more now than they mentioned the Wii U. So
true.
That's It's basically down the memory hole. I still use my Wii U as a Netflix machine, but that's essentially it. It's a good Netflix machine. I'll say that much about the Wii U. No, but Yooka-Laylee, it's been 2 years now, and that doesn't even seem right because it just celebrated its 2-year anniversary, and I'm like, what? You mean 1-year anniversary, right? Sea of Thieves has been out for 13 months now, but
yeah.
The expectations for Yooka-Laylee were huge, and I knew like they were out of control like during the Kickstarter, immediately after. Like the hype, there's no way the hype was going to be met, and I was worried about it. But we've discussed Yooka-Laylee, I think, in depth. We've done episodes for every world. We discussed it when it came out for the Switch. We're discussing it now, but it's interesting where I am now with Yooka-Laylee, especially after these developer commentaries, because I've always liked Yooka-Laylee, but it's been a game where I'm like, I really like it, but it has its flaws. Watching these, though, it's putting those flaws into a new context for me. So intellectually, I'm able to kind of see it in a new light, and even those flaws don't really bug me anymore. And I think having it for the Switch honestly has helped too, because I'm able to play it anywhere. So, because I am somebody where if I can play a game just portably, I will take that option most times because it's just so much more convenient. Like, I really don't care about getting the whole, high def experience on a huge TV, and I don't care about that. I want convenience because life be busy. It's hard enough running DK Vine and having to write about all of these games and talking nostalgia and shit post on Twitter. It's hard enough doing all of that and having time to actually play games. So when I can play them in the comfort of my office chair, I will take that. And I'm able to appreciate them a little bit more as a result, because I feel like I'm not being taken away from any of the stuff I have to do. So having it on a Switch is really, like, I think, warmed me up even more so than it did when I was playing it on the Xbox.
My opinion on Yooka-Laylee within the last 2 years has also changed, but also kind of not really. I remember when Yooka-Laylee first came out. It was my first review that I wrote for Super Jump podcast, or not the magazine Super Jump.
Right.
And I put my heart and soul into that thing because Banjo has always been very dear to me, and this to me at the time was essentially Banjo 3, which I still feel that way, but for I think in a different way. And because I was so wrapped up in it, and I played this game and I genuinely liked it, I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna get nitpicky in my review, but that's only because I think everyone else is gonna like it so much, and there's very specific things from the original two Nintendo 64 Banjo games that I think were not improved upon in Yooka-Laylee, and these very specific things I would like to talk about. Mm-hmm. And it came off as nitpicky as I intended it to, but the culture around it was not what I expected it to be. So by the time that review launched, I was actually a little bit embarrassed about it. I still kind of am, because I went more negative than I really felt, simply because I had misjudged the culture around the game, and that was a good lesson to me, to never write a review from the perspective of how I think other people will feel and try to challenge that. Just do what you think is right.
Yeah, absolutely. It's similar to when we had Craig Duncan, studio head of Rare, on the Kongversation, and I was like, well, I don't want to come off as a shill, because I already get accused of that enough. So I'm really going to grill him on Banjo, and then that was a whole story on IGN. So, whoops, sorry about that.
After I wrote that interview, by the way, Andy Robinson unfollowed me on Twitter. Oh, so, yeah.
It is important to not worry about what people like. I'm an unabashed fanboy of Rare and Playtonic, and generally there's a good reason for that. And I will point out things that I don't like, but it's never a blanket condemnation. It's more just, hey, I can recognize this is flawed over here, but you know what? Overall, the overall package, I enjoy it. I like it, and the reason is because I like the work these people do. And it's just the way my brain is attuned. It's like some people like certain kind of music and they gravitate towards that. I like certain types of games, and it's very much that rare style of game making that really just appeals to me. Ever since Donkey Kong Country, it was like, oh, I have found my niche product that is just for me. Oh boy. Not everybody can, find that in their life. So I was fortunate, maybe cursed as a result, because it really kept me from broadening my horizons as a gamer, so much so that I'm not really even a gamer. I'm just a Rare fan. But, it's at the very least, it's given DK Vine focus, and it's given me an angle in my career. So I'm not going to complain. Because we complain a lot. We complain about E3. You complained about Yooka-Laylee in your review for Super Jump. So we shouldn't complain anymore. It's funny how the expectations were so high, and then the enthusiasm just kind of plateaued. But I think as time has gone on and the game has kind of shed all of those people who are putting all of these impossible hopes and dreams on it, it has kind of retained a loyal following and fan base.
Yeah, it certainly evened out. Like it went so high and then so low, and it kind of it's settled now into I think a healthy place in video game history.
Yeah, and I think having it out for the Switch definitely helped, because let's be honest, most of the people who were looking forward to this were those lapsed Rare fans who never made the jump to Microsoft or the Xbox after Rare was bought in 2002, and so they wanted this type of game back on a Nintendo platform. And so once it came out on the Switch, it definitely found its supporters. I would say, there was kind of a fallow period in 2018, a good gulf of 2018, where Yooka-Laylee just... There's nothing happening in the world of Playtonic. They got out the Switch version at the end of 2017, and then kind of nothing. And, I bring this up because, speaking of perspectives on Playtonic, these developer commentaries were led and compiled by Daley Johnson, who left Rare and went to Playtonic, I think around the beginning of autumn last year, to become their new engagement director. And so she's running the social media now and heading up a multitude of other tasks, that are intended to kind of excite the community and get them thinking about Playtonic again. And so, in the interest of full disclosure, before I say this, Daley is a longtime supporter of DK Vine. But rest assured, I would be saying all of this even if she loathed us. If she hated us completely, I would still have this opinion. And she might hate us by the end of this episode. Who knows?
Oh, she's great. She's the best. Daley's really, really good at what she does in interacting with the community and in making... Even though Playtonic really hasn't had anything in the news recently, so people aren't, constantly expecting to hear from them, Daley's done community engagement in such a way that I think people are now thinking about Yooka-Laylee and Playtonic and everything, even when they kind of have no business thinking about them right now.
No, it's kind of like I see a little bit of what I try to do in it, just because a lot of the times it's been 5 years since a brand new Donkey Kong Country game. But I constantly have to get people thinking about Donkey Kong Country for the vitality of DK Vine's brand. So it's just basically like, hey, let's celebrate this weird, minute aspect of this game or this character. And I say this because I think, really, I've seen what's happening with Playtonic's social media accounts since she took over, and I really think that Playtonic now has their own Lee Love Day, in a sense. And that's probably the highest compliment a Rare fan of a certain vintage age can pay someone. But, it's a reductive way to frame it, too, because, she isn't just Playtonic's Love Day. She brings her own voice and enthusiasm to the brand. And I'm not saying all this to talk shit or throw shade on Andy Robinson, who ran Playtonic's social media prior to this, because he was very warm and welcoming, except when he unfollowed you. But
I don't blame him at all. I wrote a bad review.
In full disclosure, I just took over the Twitter at the time. Had I gotten a hang of it, I would have unfollowed you too, Mitchell. No, he was a quick study in the ins and outs of the Rare fan community. But I think at his heart, he was a mainstream gaming journalist, originally from print media, I believe. And he had an appreciation and love for Rare's classic games, but he really wasn't a part of our oddball community that lives and breathes at the expense of everything else. So I don't think he quite understood why we were so weird. And I felt bad for him because he was incredibly gracious at all times. But I really did feel like we were burdening him with our idiocy. Like, he has important stuff to do, and we're asking him about goldfish. Like, what the fuck are we doing to this man? Like, this man is a professional, and we're ruining him. And I don't want to like burden Daily with our idiocy, but she does come from our world, so fuck it. You know, hey Daily, here's a question about this character.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like she's done the most to publicly drive the Playtonic brand between the Switch release and the 64-bit Tonic. And so it's just been thrilling to see. Like, I'm excited about Playtonic. She's gotten me excited about Playtonic to a huge degree again. And you know, like stuff like they did a Trouser the Snake ASMR video, which if you don't know what those are, it's when people speak, you know, in really soft tones, and it's supposed to give you the chills. And just with Trouser the Snake's voice, you know, just weird shit. And I love that. It's great.
Yeah. Also, and this is a little personal. Like back, maybe like less than a year ago, I was having an issue online with some form of harassment I don't really want to get into. But,
no, we don't want to get into it.
Yeah, we don't have to get into it. But Daily was nice enough that like she reached out and asked if she could do anything, and she put like a public call in on Twitter, just like, hey, let's make sure this community is the best community it can be. And I was really appreciative of that. So just really everything Daily has done, I'm a pretty big fan of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we all are. She is emceeing all of these commentaries, and I believe she edited them as well. So, yeah, let's get into this. Let's talk about them. This has really broken down the wall, I think, the wall of secrecy that I think was around the Playtonic staff, because Playtonic formed, and they really had their coming out party in early 2015, and then Rare had their rebranding a couple months after that. Mm-hmm. And then Rare started up with all this like video content, and you really got to know everybody who was at Rare as personalities. Like that Stamper-led veil of secrecy was lifted finally, and you kind of got to know the personalities at Rare, which is really what the studio needed for the longest time, because then you can start to dispel the crap that all the good ones left back in 2000 when they formed Free Radical. Oh, you know, the people who made Donkey Kong Country, they left in 2000. So what Microsoft bought was just a hollowed out shell. Yeah, it's crap like that. And it's a disservice to all the newer people who have joined then. It's like, what, these people don't have talent? You know, they're not part of the same studio culture? Fuck off. But this does the same thing like that all of Rare's video content has done. And that's, you get to know the people at Playtonic. And you know, most of them, not all of them, but most of them are old-time Rare vets. And so this is now getting to know them just as much as you get to know the people still at Rare or the newer Rare team members. So as a fan of both studios, it's good to see people finally getting their due, and also getting to get a sense of their personality in a public forum. So,
well, should we talk about the individuals in this first episode?
Yes. I did list every individual in every episode, just so when we start calling them on a first name basis, because, again, people want me to be brief. They want me to be fast, Mitchell. Yeah. They're tired of 4-hour podcasts.
Well, we're starting talking about the first episode of the thing, and we're 40 minutes into the recording, so I don't know how I don't know how much that's working, but I appreciate the gesture.
Yeah, in the live stream, people were complaining. I believe Angry Ancestor complained in the live stream chat that, no, Hyle's getting into the history of DVD commentaries. Fuck, I'm out. He's still in there, though. I see you, Angry Ancestor. You didn't leave. You found it engaging and entertaining and informative. All right, so the prologue. So we're doing the first 4 videos again. So if you want to follow along at home, this is Prologue, aka Shipwreck Creek, but they don't list it as that. But I'm listing it as that because that's what it is. This is featuring Daley Johnson, engagement director, Gavin Price, studio head / designer, Hamish Lockwood, designer, Stephen Hurst, environment artist. And this immediately gets off to a bad note because they have a long discussion about whether the character heads on the select screen were randomized or not, because they didn't appear to be randomized when they were playing, and they couldn't remember if they actually made that a feature or not. And they are randomized, but unlike the other menus, the ones on the main screen don't change until you exit the select screen entirely, which seems to be an oversight or a bug. So for them, though, this gave the impression that the 4 character heads that were displayed were Trouser, Vendy, Yuka, and a play coin in that order. So it gave the bizarre impression that these were the 4 most important characters in Yooka-Laylee. I found that amusing because in my personal headcanon, yes, those are the 4 most important characters: Trouser, Vendy, Yuka, and a random play coin with googly eyes.
Yeah, they're basically the Beatles of the Playtonic universe.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, the play coin would, of course, be Ringo.
Yeah.
Let's not sugarcoat it, but he had a photograph. That was a big hit for him. Back Off Boogaloo. People request that sometimes. So, speaking on Vendy, though, they do bring up almost immediately how upsetting people find Vendy. And apparently Vendy, for those of you who are just listening to this cold for whatever reason, Vendy is the anthropomorphic vending machine that dispenses tonics according to her character artwork on her tongue. And Kev Bayless is to blame for Vendy, which I kind of find surprising because Kev Bayless is a very talented artist. He's responsible for Diddy Kong. Kev Bayless, his art style, I usually can't really hammer down. Like Mark Stevenson, I usually know a Mark Stevenson character when I see it, like Rextro, or looks similar to the Kremlins in Donkey Kong Country 3. So you're like, oh, that's a Mark Stevenson character. Kev Bayless, he's more of a chameleon.
Well, no, that's Steve Mails.
Yeah, Kev Bayless, though, responsible for Vendy, apparently. The man who gave us Diddy Kong gave us Vendy.
I love Vendy. I think Vendy is one of the best character designs in Yooka-Laylee. I think people sleep on Vendy. I think people don't appreciate her enough and what she brings to the table. Especially like when you think about any kind of background for Vendy. Things really break down in just a delightful way. Like, was she built specifically for this job that she's doing? And if so, when she was she built to be an adult person, or was she a baby at one point? There's so many great things to think about with Vendy that I think go underthought about.
So many areas of existential horror, really.
If Vendy dies, does her dispense mechanism still work? Is she just a corpse that you get tonics out of?
No, but Vendy was apparently originally a duck in the vending machine, dispensing stuff in the vending machine to you, and eventually they changed that to just a living vending machine, just to bring home the nightmarish aspect of it. Yeah, Vendy has really grown on me. Vendy was kind of a joke at first, among DK Vine, oh Vendy, oh god. But the more I think about Vendy, as you said, in a weird way, sleep on Vendy. The more people sleep on Vendy, the more I feel like they appreciate her. And it just cracks me up that a perfect human specimen like Kev Bayless, because look at the man, he doesn't age, he's a handsome dude, and I just don't know how he gave us something as horrific as Vendy, but I love Vendy all the same. They suggest that as they get into the video, the opening cutscene plays, and they suggest that the Ivory Tower security camera is based on the design of the cameras from GoldenEye 007, which I honestly would have never picked up on had they specifically spelled that out, because that's my brain is so divorced from GoldenEye minutia that I wouldn't be able to kind of pick that out as a reference.
I mean, they also just kind of look like security cameras. I'm sure the ones in GoldenEye 007, I haven't seen them in a while. I'm sure they look very similar in a minute sort of way, but They look like security cameras.
I mean, yeah, I did a Google image search to compare, and I was like, oh, I guess I can see it. So they skip over the cutscene, though, and then they get right into Shipwreck Creek. So all the little details on the rock that Yooka-Laylee are laying out on, next to the batship crazy. You know, they've got the sandals, the sunglasses, the Laylee's huge towel and Yuka's small towel. My favorite, the underpants catalog, the paint cans. Those were all created by background artist Dave Rose. And I loved all of that stuff because immediately when you start the game, you get all of this texture to this world, which I always love about the rare pedigree games, where you feel like these are living, breathing environments. They're not just video game obstacle courses, that there's actually people living here, living somewhat mundane lives, just with a greater degree of absurdity, like the absurdity cranked up a little bit on the dial. And just stuff, just like, oh, here are the magazines these people read. Like, that's the stuff that made me a Rare fan, especially like in the N64 era, when they could actually like put those details in a little bit more or spell them out a little bit greater. So yeah, I appreciated all of that. But there's no commentary on if the pants catalog with the Y-front pants on it were inspired by Mr. Pants, but that's fine. That's because that suits me and my headcanon, because I choose to believe that's his own catalog that he sends out on a monthly basis, the Mr. Pants catalog, and I'd hate for Playtonic to ruin that for me. So I'm glad that was just kind of left undisturbed.
Yeah, I would definitely hate for them to talk about what they've done.
Yeah, that would be the worst thing to happen to me all year. Would be for them to give me a greater degree of information on something I don't want. It's like finding out there's no Santa Claus. You know, you kind of have a hunch at a certain age, but you really don't want to find out for sure, because you know it's just going to make Christmas less special.
I should somewhat preemptively, but also just emptively, because it's happening right now, apologize, because it seems that there are workers in the attic directly above the room that I'm in, and I really can't do anything about it.
Workers, or do you have like monsters in your attic, gremlins or something?
Well, that's what they're fighting, so it's going to be loud for a little bit. Something I really liked about this section of the commentary track is that they've gone into specific mysteries that I've almost forgotten that I once had, which was like, who is Penny? Because there's the name Penny carved into the underside of the top deck of the batship crazy, and that's Dave Rose's daughter, and he's put that name in there as and as an homage to her, and there are lots of those all over the game, and it turns out that is, for the most part, the kind of meaning they have. Usually someone in the real world, a loved one or a friend or a fan or something. Now, that's cool. That I love that, and that's great. But via like time-honored DK Vine rules, we still need to assume that there's a real Penny in the game.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I believe it was Gavin Price, again, Playtonic studio head, and eventually I'm going to shorten that to Gav, because that's what they call him.
Sure. And then just Gav.
Well, I've exchanged emails with Gavin in the past, but like I haven't really had a proper like meetup with him or discussion, so I feel bad just calling him by his shorthand name, but that's what they call him. So I'm just like, I got to make these quicker, because I spent 40 minutes talking about DVD commentary tracks, so I've got to speed things up. So he's Gav from now on, all right, Gav. But I believe he mentioned that even though these are intended as just tips of the hat to Playtonic children or engaged relatives or whatever, they actually might eventually like reveal an in-universe Penny, for example. They might just use that as a jumping off point and say, well, if the name is Penny is carved into the underside of the batship crazy, maybe we should introduce a character named Penny, which I appreciate as a lore hound and as a chronicler of continuity because, I know it's a sweet gesture towards a child, but I'm an awful bastard and I need in-universe justification for it. I'm sorry. I do. And luckily, it seems they have my back on this. So I feel better about being a terrible human being as a result. A sociopath, really.
Great. I'm glad you do.
I know. It's all about self-acceptance. That is my new mantra for DK Vine, teaching people self-acceptance and loving one another through the power of fandom. And they've done that. I am a terrible human being, Mitchell, and Playtonic says it's okay. So, Trouser. Let's talk about Trouser. Gav originally designed Trouser. I'll stop saying it like that.
Yeah, that didn't work like you... That did not work like I think you thought it would work.
Guys, no, I'm just stretching it out to make it fill up more time because my brain is broken. It's a broken mechanism, and I don't know how to fix it. He was originally designed by Gav, Trouser the Snake. He wanted a character that was trying to look like a professional and put together like a businessman or salesman, but with just an obvious desperate loser with like a sheen of flop sweat on him. And he wanted his snake body to only go through one side of the shorts he was wearing rather than looping through both. He wanted an empty leg of the shorts kind of flapping in the breeze. And they mention this in the first video, but then they actually show the sketch itself. They superimpose it on the Moody Mace Marsh video when they bring up Trouser again. And it's on a post-it note with the sketch that Gav originally did. And no offense to him, but this looks awful. This is a terrible character design. I included it in our show notes, Mitchell, so you can have a refresher on this.
I am looking at it. It's definitely a first draft. I mean, it's written on a post-it note.
It looks like a tapeworm. It looks like a tapeworm. It doesn't look like a snake. It looks like something we get pulled out of the large intestine. Like, oh wow, you've been eating something undercooked because you have this giant tapeworm in your body, and it also has a tie on it.
I do like how the pants just kind of float at what essentially equates to a waist on the character.
Yeah, the way they described it at first, I was picturing it like flying like a flag on a flagpole, but no, this is it's like very starched shorts. And there's also a stinky sock. It's specifically laid out as a stinky sock on Trouser's tail. But Steve Males was the one who amended the design to what we know it as today. So, for the best, I do like Trouser. He's a lot of people's favorite character, Trouser. They bring up the question about why a move giver in the game, the equivalent to Bottles, is a snake. And I really like the reason Gav gave, like what he originally conceived, was that the way he saw Trouser, he would be somebody who demonstrated each move in animation, with him showing off the move. But because he's just a snake with a tube for a body, all he would do is like shimmy and flail about, like the same every time. But he would be like, oh, this is what the move looks like, and just like convulse. And that would have been very, very amusing had they gone through with it. But in the end, it's just he is what he is. He's more there for the innuendo in his name than anything. And they bring that up. They do bring that up. The name Trouser and the penile implications therein.
Yeah, I think there's some gameplay implications that if he just kind of convulsed and wiggled around for a while, you are trying to teach the player to do a thing, even if it's joked about in the fiction of the universe. You're still trying to say, hey, if you do this, you'll do a flap or a spin or a twist or whatever, and if you don't see it, you're gonna potentially learn wrong because most players are not good at video games, and that is something that you'll always have to design around.
Yeah, there also information retention is kind of important. So if you give intentionally misleading information, like this move looks like a flailing snake, then that probably won't go over well.
Because maybe you'll want to use the flailing snake move later on, but then you realize, oh, that was actually sonar. So I have sonar,
Right.
but I can't do
The flailing snake, right? And then it's going to be like whenever they would joke in the past about features, like Donkey Kong 64, Cranky mentions the scroll of gameplay in the instruction manual, which is just an obvious joke that this game is shit and you'll never find a scroll of gameplay because this game doesn't have good gameplay. Cranky's whole shtick, but to this day, people ask, "Where's the scroll of gameplay?" It's in the instruction manual. Like it just flies right over their heads. So yeah, I can see why that would have been problematic. But about Trouser being a dick, a literal dick joke. So Steve Mails got in trouble with his wife over it, apparently, and I actually already knew this because it came up when Chad and I had dinner with Andy Robinson and Grant Kirkhope. Look at me and my name dropping, right?
Yeah, I'll pick that up for you real quick.
Thank you. It's very valuable, the time I had dinner with Andy Robinson and Grant Kirkhope. But yeah, that came up, I think like 3 beers deep, and I was like, uh-huh. So because of that, because they were debating whether or not that was appropriate for their brand new IP, the first game the studio developed, to have just an out-and-out penis joke and one of the very first characters you meet. But because Steve Mails got in trouble over it, they kept it, which I appreciate. Why do Yooka-Laylee live on a pirate ship? That's something that came up. And this is all like stuff I think that was sussed out pre-release. I remember reading about this in, I think, the PlayStation magazine when they had a cover feature on Yooka-Laylee. Gavin really likes the notion of a mysterious pirate ship that's high up in the mountains with no explanation. It's kind of like the Black Rock from Lost, the pirate ship that was out in the middle of the jungle. And for 6 seasons, you're like, how did it get there? What's happening? But then it just turns out like Jacob did it. And so, But he's adamant once again that the batship crazy, the mystery of it, will be answered in the years to come. So you get a lot of this throughout these videos. Gav is very ambitious with lore and story, and he's apparently got all of these ideas for characters, for plots, for backstory, and we'll get into that on a case-by-case basis as it comes up, but it's almost a little overwhelming because usually I feel like I'm having to mine blood out of the rocks, so to speak. Like, there's not a lot for me to go off of, so I'm having to really read between the lines to get, like, good lore out of it. But, like, Gav is all about that, apparently. He's really about just an incessant amount of backstory, so much so that it's probably off-putting to anybody but hardcore DK Vine folk.
Yeah, there's a recurring thing in these videos where someone will ask a question about a lore-related thing, and every once in a while Gavin will say something like, "Oh, well, it could come up in a sequel," and it's always a little surprising to me, because, like, that thing's gonna come up in a sequel? I wouldn't have assumed, but okay.
At first, I just assumed he was bullshitting. Like, oh yeah, like the George Lucas. Oh yeah, I have a reason for that. And it was really, he hasn't really come up with anything. But it just sounds better, like you have a master plan. But as the videos went on, I realized, oh no, he's serious, because they actually bring up like documents, and Daily like confirms, like, oh, I saw that document. So it's apparently true. So they do have like a lot of Playtonic lore mapped out, which is exciting for me. And I mean, that's what we learned when Chris Sutherland was on the show in that first interview we did. Like, they have a shared universe plan. They have an interconnected web of games they want to build on, and each game will be part of that. So yeah,
like to jump ahead just for a second, in the Glitterglaze Glacier episode, Gavin Price talks about someone asks who owns the isometric palace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he says, well, that one might come up later. And that one surprised me for sure, because, like, that's really the palace is gonna, okay, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And then I did have a brief discussion about whether or not Yooka-Laylee had just moved in, and even though this is like established in game, they confirm that yes, it is the case. They've just moved in, and that's probably why they haven't noticed the obvious giant corporate factory that's literally adjacent to them. But yeah, so that like the batship crazy wasn't the batship crazy until like the beginning of this game when they had finished renovating and painting it, and they found the one book. They bring up Blasto and Kabloomy, the obvious Banjo-Kazooie nods and homages, and originally Blasto was painted with blue and yellow to kind of drive it home even more. And they do have a cool discussion here, though, about references to their past and their own kind of self-deprecating humor at Playtonic and Rare before this. And, they bring up specifically about Grab by the Ghoulies and how after the commercial failure of that game, and critical failure at the time, although it's definitely gotten reevaluated over the years, at least by people who care to reevaluate it. Because of that, they all loved Ghoulies, but because of the way it was received, they would always poke fun at it and themselves after it was released. And, I think that was most evident in Nuts and Bolts, but they still love the game, and that's just part of their own, self-loathing, which I appreciate. I remember, having discussions about how mean-spirited Nuts and Bolts was. It was just so mean-spirited to Rare, to themselves. I was like, to themselves? No, it's just them taking the piss out of themselves. They're British. That is what they do. Get over it.
Yeah, and there's also the thing of, whether you thought Ghoulies was the best game in the world or the worst game in the world, that the idea of it didn't sell in the millions, it sold in the tens of thousands, not even hundreds of thousands. You can't. It's hard to look at that as anything other than some form of, if not creative, then production failure on some level. There will be jokes.
marketing, but being who they are, they'll take it on the chin and have fun with it.
I'm not even willing to say marketing because I really just don't think the demographic was right.
No, and it's purely down to they were developing it for the GameCube, and then it was essentially the first game that was going to be ready for the Xbox. I'm not going to especially now in this video, I'm not going to try to relitigate that just because I do love Grab by the Ghoulies. It is unironically in my top 4 favorite games of all time, and I'm just glad we got it. I don't even care at this point. It got off the whole Microsoft era on a bad foot, and if they had delayed it or did this or did that. No, I'm just happy to have it, and I'm happy it's in Rare Replay, and I'm happy that some people have rediscovered it, and it's just going to be this gem, this little gem that I know you're going to be my friend if you like Grab by the Ghoulies, because you get it. You understand. And if you make fun of Grab by the Ghoulies, we're going to have a rockier start. And we might be feuding for several years. And then, then we'll reevaluate our relationship. But until then.
Well, the modern example of Nuts and Bolts making fun of Grab by the Ghoulies is now Yooka-Laylee making fun of Nuts and Bolts. And, for the same reasons, I think that is also fair. But yeah, it's just time keeps moving.
I remember how DK Vine had problems with that. Back in 2015 and 2016, oh no, Yooka-Laylee is trashing Nuts and Bolts. Are they trashing Rare as a result? Even though a lot of the people here worked on Nuts and Bolts, it's just get over it. You have to let them take the piss out of themselves, or you're not letting them be true to who they are. So we're just sensitive Americans, Mitchell. That's all we are. We don't I think we've forgotten the art of sarcasm here, and self-deprecation. So they enter Ivory Towers, and they go through a little bit of the tutorial, the very rudimentary tutorial. And they talk about the swimming controls and how they amended it based on feedback from the toy box. Because I remember when the toy box came out and how swimming threw everybody for a curve because it didn't feel like Banjo. And people wanted them to just model everything after Banjo, but they, I think, stuck to their guns with a more modern control scheme. And I think that's one of the big successes of Yooka-Laylee in my mind. I kind of felt it when I first played it, but especially after playing it for the last 2 years. I feel like when I now go back and I play Banjo-Kazooie, or just, and I usually just boot it up because I need to get a screenshot or something for DK Vine or source something and I need to jump into the game, but I'll play it for a while, and it honestly, after Yooka-Laylee, it's kind of ruined Banjo for me, and just Banjo feels sluggish. I'm not knocking it. It's a product of its time, but compared to Yooka-Laylee, it doesn't feel crisp anymore. And I'm glad that they utilized the control schemes they did in Yooka-Laylee, because once I got used to it, it's hard to go back.
I don't know. I'm maybe a little more old-fashioned with my swimming controls. I guess if you can be, if that's such a thing that you can be. I remember pretty distinctly wanting there to be more of a sense of, like, I should be able to push some button to make me go forward more, like, just to push harder. And I remember that being kind of a hard thing to get used to. It definitely is a thing about getting used to it. I think part of the dichotomy of understanding when it comes to swimming versus walking around is that walking around really does feel a lot like Banjo, and then swimming suddenly doesn't,
Hey, why don't you ask those construction men in your attic where they stand on this situation? Because I feel like they could give some great insight onto whether they prefer the old school swimming controls of Banjo or the newer style in Yooka.
Oh man, I don't know when they're gonna go. I'm so sorry.
I mean, just ask. I'm just saying, ask them. We'll get them on the show. I feel like it could be some good, spontaneous, spur of the moment thought. They don't have show notes to work off of, so it would be putting them on the spot.
It would be, and everyone loves to be put on the spot. But in this specific, I mean, I can tell that they like the new controls. I can just tell from the sounds they're making.
Just in their demeanor, the way they walk.
Yeah, the way they talk, the way they kind of just slam their entire body weight against the wall every 3 seconds.
Clearly, everything's going their way in the world of modern 3D platforming swimming controls. They don't have a care in the world right now. So they bring up the Corplets, the main stock baddie in Yooka-Laylee. And they wanted a distinctive character that you could see from a great distance away that would be identifiable and would also be satisfying to kind of whack, to kind of attack and dispense with. And it was the first character model in the game. And I remember, early 2015, seeing that model. We actually used it on the key art of that Chris Sutherland episode we did, that interview with him. So, I like the Corplets. I think they really excel when you go into each world and they're specialized to the environment there. It keeps them from being too samey. Like, there's some visual distinction there.
Yeah, Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie did not have a standard enemy. They had enemies that you would see in the hub, and I guess they would kind of take the role of that.
Yeah, there's the gruntlings,
each individual world had different enemies, and this seems like an area where they knew their limitations. They knew that, like, if we do distinct different enemies for every world, the work would just never stop, and the game would never come out, which is a smart move to make. You can't do everything you want to do all the time. But I think they've done a good job coding each corplet skin to the world it's in pretty well, and that comes across in the way they talk about it as well. They talk about every now and again they bring up something like, we thought maybe about doing it this way, but it became evident how much more work that would be and how much more time that would be and how just unrealistic that would have been. So we didn't do it. It reminds you about the context in which the game was made as not really an indie game, not quite an indie game. They say that. I don't know if I would agree with that categorization of what they're doing, but definitely not a AAA full budgeted project either. They're working with what they have a lot of the time, and things like the Corplets are very smart workarounds to those limitations.
They're smart workarounds, but they also tie into thematic unity, which comes up with the pages and quills and a discussion there. Because they were talking about how they decided on pieces of golden paper and essentially feather pens as the collectible items in the game, the equivalent to the jiggies and music notes of Banjo. And it all ties into the one book, the MacGuffin of the one book, and the Grand Tomes, which serve as the worlds, and the Ghost Writers, which are the Jinjos of the game, but they are the authors of the book. We still don't know, I think, if each individual one wrote an individual Grand Tome, or if they all collectively did it. That is something they're keeping purposely vague. But they do a good job here, I think, in general in Yooka-Laylee, about having more of that thematic unity than the Banjo games, because when you look at Banjo, there is no inherent connection between jigsaw pieces, music notes, or like little Furby creatures with long beaks. Like I like all of those elements. Obviously, they're a big part of my childhood and somehow my adult life. But like you would think, Banjo-Kazooie, it's gonna all be themed around music, but that's just a kind of a small aspect of it, and then they go off in these other directions, these tangents. And Yooka-Laylee, it's all about, I guess, literature angle to it, which is weird for a video game to take, but I think it works. And Gav talks about how the one book, the MacGuffin of the game, it can rewrite reality, sort of like the Infinity Stones, for those of you still on Avengers Endgame kick. No spoilers, don't worry. Then he brings up the fact that if the wrong person got their hands on the one book and they rewrote reality, then what if they specifically wrote something in on a specific pagey? Would that pagey then have to die to set things right in the universe? And that's the kind of bizarre like mindset that excites me that they're thinking about, because we never saw any repercussions of the one book in Yooka-Laylee, but if it could come back in the future, like that would be a good scenario for the sequel. What if the one book does change reality and go? How do they set it right then? And apparently that might have to involve the pagey either sacrificing itself or being murdered. I don't know. And then they also, along the same lines, they talk about how the environments of the Grand Tomes bleed out into the immediate area where they're stored in Ivory Towers. Yeah. And that this may be a direct, inadvertent result of Capital B keeping the Grand Tomes hostage.
It's also a fairly direct reference to how the worlds of Banjo-Kazooie spill out into the Grunty's lair, except now that there's this whole literature scaffolding, there's more of a mechanical in-universe reason for why that's happening.
It's definitely more defined here than, because we still argue about Banjo-Kazooie. Well, are those worlds in a separate dimensional realm, or where are these worlds? Whereas Yooka-Laylee, it's like there's a world within these books, and the world like keeps going, but it's still basically contained in the books. And I won't recite all of this. I had plans to before I got to 50 pages of notes for both episodes, but I do have a theory on how the Grand Tomes and the Quills and the Ghost Writers, I have a theory on how all that works. And that's on the DK Vine Facebook page. You just have to look in the photo album, Your Sunday Morning Shot of Spirituality, where I talk about the spiritual mystical elements of these games every Sunday morning as a stand-in for church. And so you can check that out. I think I did a 5-part series on that like a year or so ago. So anyway. And then they talk a little bit about the reptile roll ability and getting the physics of it just right. And the reptile roll is probably one of the most used moves, especially early on in the game, where, Yuka rolls up into a ball and Laylee rolls on him. Was this hard for you? Played the toy box, right?
I did.
Was this move extraordinarily difficult for you to get the hang of in a toy box, or was that just me?
Well, I'd love to say it was to help out a friend. But, no.
Oh, okay, so I just suck. Well, okay, so it was hard for me in the toy box, but it was a much smoother experience in-game. So maybe I just ironed out the kinks in my own brain.
Well, there were some control differences between the toy box and the full game, which was the purpose of the toy box. I don't remember the role specifically having a different feel to it, but possibly.
I remember it being a lot looser or something, because I remember trying to get up the like slopes with it and just like falling constantly, but I never had that problem in game. So
well, in the next episode I remember them saying something about Rampo and how the boss battle with Rampo had some implications on how the interactions between slopes and rolls worked in the game. It might not actually be the roll that changed. It might be the slope and like the interaction between the roll and the slope that changed as a result of that boss battle being designed.
I didn't take any notes for that, so apologies when we get there. So they also bring up, before they enter Tribalstack Tropics, or before I guess the video ends, because they did not film these back to back to back to back to back, because they're not insane people like we are. The cages, the pages in the cages, the whole conceit of the cages, that they're there to, I guess, bluntly display mysteries for players and allow them to determine if it's worth chasing at that moment or not. And they just talk a little bit about the whole idea of cages versus the other pages you collect in the game, and how they might use cages in future games. And they bring up Yooka-Laylee. They actually specifically call it Yooka-Laylee. But the implication is that they wouldn't just have to be used in a Yooka-Laylee sequel, which they do this a lot in these videos. They bring up a hypothetical game that's not a Yooka-Laylee sequel that they might make that might utilize something from this game. And I'm just like, what? I can't even conceive where your brain space is at right now. And one more interesting tidbit about the opening bit here is that all of those random ass skulls and bones that you found throughout the game, like in every world you would find just decapitated skulls or human bones. Hamish Lockwood is the one who put those there, and he just put it there just to signify that Hyrie Towers is a bad place and people are always getting murdered there. But I really thought there was a bigger mystery there. It really gave this sense of ancient foreboding doom.
Well, just like there might be a penny later, I feel that there's something going on. There's like a second unifying motif. After the whole literature thing, there's a lot going on with skeletons, and you just see them everywhere, as you were just saying. There's also a skeleton character, of course, and then there's the pirate treasure that you find in every level.
They do a good job of glossing over the pirate treasure, at least in the first 4 videos. Like, they bring it up, but they never really elaborate on it. So, yeah, there is a lot of skeleton nonsense in this game, which makes it feel like a thematic cousin to Sea of Thieves at the same time. But yeah. I really don't know. Like, it wasn't a satisfactory explanation for me that Hamish Lockwood just put it in there because, oh, yeah, people be dying in Hyrie Towers. No, I demand more than that. This has befuddled me since I first played the game, why there were so many human remains throughout. I demand more, Playtonic, please.
This is one more thing that made me think about like something that just seemed so obvious to have, like how Yooka-Laylee has their skull and, I guess, literature motifs co-running at the same time, and then I thought, like, what did Banjo-Kazooie have? And then it's like you're supposed to think music, but that was kind of light. And then you think of the pages and cages. The cages are such a defined way to show that you have a pagey opportunity here that you can't immediately cash in. You need to do something for it. Mm-hmm. What did Banjo-Kazooie have for it? Like, it didn't. There wasn't an analog for it. And then the corplets are another thing. Like, every world has a corplet, and Banjo-Kazooie did not. And it made me simultaneously appreciate the unifying forces going on in the development of Yooka-Laylee, but also the forces of variety going on in Banjo-Kazooie. I didn't really think about that game in those terms before, like how it didn't have a lot of the obvious things connecting each area and each level and each challenge that they could have had. And I think both games are better for leaning into their individual philosophies in that way.
Yeah, and it's funny, when Yooka-Laylee came out, so many people were comparing it to Banjo in negative ways. Like, here's where it falls short of Banjo-Kazooie. But I feel like not enough people looked at how it actually improved on the formula. And I think these commentaries have really helped crystallize a lot of those reasons in my mind. Like the KGs. It just flew over my head at the time. But having it spelled out for me, and then I can go back and recall my own experiences playing the game, I'm like, oh yeah, that was pretty cool. Like, good design is when you don't even notice the design, and having it had to be spelled out for me makes me feel like, oh, well, so the stuff that I didn't appreciate at the time was because it was so seamlessly integrated that I was just too dense to pick up on. So,
right.
So I feel like in between each video would be a good time to check in with the live stream chat. And so we have a correction. Apparently it was DK Vine staffer and Golden Sands blog post administrator Jeff Onan who gave me shit about the DVD commentary discussion, and not Angry Ancestor. So I would like to apologize to Angry Ancestor, and I would like to say, Jeff, go to hell. Go straight to hell. I hope you burn.
See you at E3!
Yeah, right. Oh, yeah. We're see, when we spoon together in the same bed, I will be whispering about how I want to see your body burn for eternity.
Yeah, but I mean, that'll just happen by default. Hey man, it's LA.
Tribalstack Tropics, Video 2, featuring Daley Johnson, engagement director, who was sick during this video. And I have sympathies because I am starting to get the pre-3 bug. So in the build-up to E3, the month of May, I usually get sick like 3 times. And sure enough, I woke up this morning with a tickle in my throat. So here we go. The fun begins. The magic of E3 is upon us. Ooh. Just like when you start to see like the first frost on your car as the holidays approach. It's when I cough up some phlegm that I know, oh, it's almost here. E3 is upon us. Gavin Price is back, studio head designer. Hamish Lockwood is back, designer. Stephen Hurst, environment art. The gang's all here. So they bring up, and this is another area where I just completely overlooked because, again, I am a stupid man. At the start of every world, they force the move that Trouser just gave you for free in Ivory Towers. And so, for example, in Tribalstack, it's the reptile roll. I completely missed that. Like, obviously, intellectually, I knew, like, oh, I have to do the reptile roll, which I just learned. But I never really picked up on the fact that it's baked into every world that you kind of have to do the move to progress any further from this immediate starting area.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a criticism of Yooka-Laylee that I agree with. That
okay.
It's one of the big ones that are thrown around. That the world design doesn't account for the space between critical areas, like in Tribalstack Tropics, the world we're talking about. The majority of it is a plane you can walk around, and it's not going to be so hard or necessarily interesting to walk from place to place on a plane, because there's very little play with obstacles or elevation or enemies, things like that. And things like this area at the start of Tribalstack Tropics, where you do need to use a roll to get up there, the move you just got, make me think like that area of the game isn't something that they were unaware of or they weren't thinking about, but it is something they could have done more with. And I'm really glad to see that, or to hear rather, that the developers of the game acknowledge that part of game design in a significant way, because I think for this first game, and they talk about this in some detail as well. In this first game, there was this whole thing of like, we had a lot of Kickstarter money, but at the same time, that's not a lot of money in game design terms. It's a lot of money in Kickstarter terms, of course, but yeah, they had a lot of this. They were building the team as they were going. A lot of people were in and out and everything. But oh my god, just people. Anyway,
you know, it's nice. It's nice because it's like you're recording in a haunted mansion. So. Yeah. You know, it's delighting the child in me. It's like, ooh, you know, we've got spooky ghosts here on the Conversation.
Yeah, what could be happening? Ooh. So what the point I was getting at was what was I talking about actually?
Well, we're going to get into this because they bring up all these points throughout the video.
Oh, yeah, I remember. They keep talking about things they wish they could have done or that they would do next time, and the acknowledgement of certain things like this, even though this is an area that they did well in, the acknowledgement of like, we did this well in this area, and it could have been like all over the game, but we kept having to re-rig our entire development system. So it feels good to know that they see those kinds of things too. Is basically what I was trying to get at.
Absolutely, they're cognizant of, I guess, where they made missteps. That I think that's it's reassuring that like even like I love Yooka-Laylee, but you know where I recognize it as flaws, they see those flaws too. So it's not just whistling past the graveyard. It's everybody's aware of it, and they won't make those mistakes again. But yeah, so at the beginning, then after they do the reptile roll and they talk about the emotes in the game and how it was spurred by, in Banjo-Kazooie, whenever you got a Jiggy, they would do the automatic dance and it would kind of take you out of gameplay. And then in Banjo-Tooie, they just got rid of that and you had nothing. So their solution was just give you like essentially the equivalent of smash taunts. And that way, if you want to celebrate whenever you get a Pagey or whatever, you can do it. But if not, you can just forget about it. And I like that. I think that was a clever workaround and to let both sides have their way.
Yeah, I will be honest. I did not know this was in the game.
You didn't know the emotes were in the game?
I might have known once, but I completely forgot.
You know, you've got the speedrunner mentality, and that is not me. I'm somebody who really wants to like live in the world when I'm there and really soak in every detail. So yeah, I use the emotes quite a bit. It was just fun for me. It was fun texture. And because I'm never in a hurry, obviously, as this is going to be 4 hours long. So yeah, I really like that workaround. I thought it was a nice touch, and I'm very appreciative that it's there. They run into plants for a while, and they have a nice discussion about how Stephen Hurst implemented all the wobbly plants, so whenever you brush up against them, they shimmy. Just, you know, a nice little detail there. They wanted a bright, sunshiny jungle level for the first world, and that was kicking around since the Kickstarter, no pun intended. But they wanted it to be a deliberate return to the blue sky, the lush greenery of gaming in the 90s, the 20 years ago. You know, a callback to Donkey Kong and Banjo's first worlds. So that was always in the cards to have Tribalstack Tropics or some variation of it be what opened the game.
It's a very safe, but at the same time very effective way to start. Even Mario Odyssey pretty much did it. The first actual kingdom in that game is the Cap Kingdom, which is like a Tim Burton place, but that's more of like an intro level. Where the first real level is the Cascade Kingdom, which has dinosaur bones and blue skies and grasslands and little mountains, and that's it. It's just the way to do it. It just seems like how you do that thing. I have no idea what the chemical alchemy is like for deciding that grasslands and jungles are good first levels. I don't know what makes that true, but it does seem like inherently true, intrinsically true.
Yeah, I don't know. Like with Donkey Kong, it makes sense because he is a gorilla, so he would be starting in a jungle. But I really don't know how that's extrapolated to the entire genre. You got me. That's above my pay grade. I just write about this nonsense. I don't actually come up with it. They bring up your point almost immediately that they gave themselves a bit of trouble when they made this world by making it so wide and expansive. You have like views in every direction, and they had to make it all unique and distinctive. And it's just they have hindsight now, and they know they would do things differently the second time around. So I never had a problem with this, really. I just liked running around because I found the gameplay so... just the control scheme so addictive that I didn't care that I had space to run around in. But yeah, they're aware of it. But that's why when you expand Tribalstack Tropics, it goes vertical after being mostly horizontal up until that point.
Right.
Which is a nice touch.
It is. And I think that area of the world is probably the coolest, most exciting area of the world whenever you
Definitely.
go up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because when you're traveling upward, the space between areas is never walkable. The space between areas is always a little puzzle in and of itself. And that just makes the world feel so much denser, even though it might not necessarily, mathematically be denser if you actually mapped it out. It makes it feel so much more memorable. I remember going up that mountain almost... instance by instance, moment by moment, whereas walking around the circle around that main temple area is a little more hazy, and I think that mountain is probably probably one of the strongest design areas of the game in Tribalstack Tropics. It really works for me.
I can see that, yeah. Yeah, and it's a little bit, just a little bit of the Kazooie versus Tooie debate, because Tooie had those wide, expansive, sprawling worlds, where Kazooie was always a little bit tighter and more economical. And, that is, I think, one of my main criticisms of Tooie still. I don't even know where I stand on the Kazooie versus Tooie debate, because it just depends what I'm in the mood for, but... yeah, walking around Witchy World, for example, it's not as memorable to me as any of the Banjo-Kazooie worlds, just because it's just things were laid out. They all had a purpose. They all had a reason for being. It wasn't just a wide gulf for the sake of it.
It's interesting that in that sort of design philosophy, Yooka-Laylee is maybe an even more extreme... God damn it. I'm so sorry, Hyle, that you'll have to edit this episode. No, that's just fine.
No. Clearly, those men in the attic, they prefer the Banjo-Kazooie style, too. That's why they're in an attic. Yeah. Not much space, but they make the most of it.
They're mad at me because they know I'm a Tooie fan, but the point was that Yooka-Laylee is maybe in a more extreme Tooie, even. It almost... if you're to map the three of them on a spectrum, it almost makes Tooie look like a middle ground. Between Yooka and Kazooie. And I would love to hear... I don't know if they ever specifically go into that, but I'd love to hear why they went with that direction, because it seems controversial.
Maybe it's just packing the most in each world, since they only had 5 worlds. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's not to say, it was ever really an issue for me, especially in Yooka-Laylee versus Tooie. I never really felt like it was as great of a burden. Maybe Moody Maze Marsh, just stumbling my way around that, but I don't really remember it being an issue in Glitterglaze Glacier or Capital Casino. But we'll get into that as we get into it, I guess. They bring up Clara, which Clara is one of my favorite characters, Mitchell, in Yooka-Laylee. I just love the whole ridiculous notion that she is this explorer who has had her flesh burned off.
Well, you know what they say.
What do they say?
She's no Vendy.
Well, they do say that. I hear that all the time. I see it on license plates, vanity plates.
She's no Vendy. Hashtag blessed.
It's almost a tired cliche at this point, but no, I like that. She has her skin boiled off, and then became friends with the pot in which it presumably happened. Potty Mouth is the pot's name, and that just level of absurdity and detail is the kind of brain crack I get high to in rare and Playtonic games. That's. What? But to become friends, and that's just, I don't know. I'm just spinning in circles here, mental circles. I am spinning, but yeah, I really like that Clara not only appears here, but then just keeps reappearing throughout the game, and I really hope she appears in the future, because I feel like there's a lot of untapped potential for Clara, the skeleton explorer. And the whole Clara sequence, too, was designed as a sort of prototype challenge, apparently. And that's why there's so many little bits in there, like camera movements, cutscenes, spawning enemies, dialogue. That's why it felt more kind of grand than it actually turned out to be, and just because they used it as a demo, sort of, a demo reel for everything they could do in the game. So... it was nice to have a little bit of context there.
Now, question for you, Hyle. Do you view Clara as a Tribalstack Tropics character? Or do you view her as more of a general character?
So, yeah, you've got these characters who are exploring the Grand Tomes who are not natives to the Grand Tomes. I believe the Knights of Hamelot, it's pretty much inferred that they're just coming in from the outside world that, like, Yooka-Laylee inhabit. And then you've got Clara, and I'm under the impression that Clara is a native of Tribalstack because she would fit the thematic idea of that book much more so than like she would any other place. Now, granted, she could be an outside explorer coming into the world like Shovel Knight, but for me, like, for now, I'm just fine with the idea that she is a creation of this Grand Tome. But then, like all the other creations, she is free to leave since there is a portal right there to the outside world. And then she can go explore Glitterglaze Glacier or whatever. What about you?
Yeah, I don't know. Because she appears with about the same amount of importance in other levels later in the game. But,
yeah.
So do the pigs. In the pigs, I definitely don't consider Tribalstack Tropics characters.
Oh, no. The Knights of Hamelot are definitely, like, I think just... Oh my god.
Yeah, no, this house is coming down. I'm excited about it. But yeah, like, Shovel Knight is obviously not from any of the books because he's from Shovel Knight. So it's not impossible. And, like, he seems to be from the area in Shovel Knight, even in the fiction of Yooka-Laylee. So it's not impossible that there's just maybe like a prehistoric or like more adventure-y kind of area that we didn't see in the game that Clara could be from.
Indiana Jones.
Yeah. Or this is it. I like it's either one. I don't know.
I mean, like she would fit the idea of Tribalstack Tropics. You know, the pith hat, but. I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to marry myself to any particular fanon because then when they invalidate it, I'm going to be disappointed and for no fault but my own. So I do like Clara. I would love to have an entire game about Clara because I feel like she is one of the most appealing characters for me. Like, I like Vendy, but I don't really know what you could do with a Vendy game.
Probably a dating sim.
Frame it like that and suddenly I'm on board again.
Yeah, of course.
They briefly talked about the butterflies and how they were used as a combination for both health and move energy. And they wanted to reduce the number of items in the game. But the energy meter in general seemed to be pretty divisive amongst the team. What do you think about the way they did the butterflies and how they combine that and the whole energy meter in general? Like, did you feel like that was a good compromise or did you never really warm to that?
Hard to say. In general, a collectible that you need to interact with differently to get different stuff out of it, that aspect of it I'm not necessarily on board with. And that's just because, like, if I'm too close to the butterfly, I like my option of choice is taken away a little bit. And also, it's like, when you are Mario and you collect a coin, or you're Banjo and you collect a honeycomb, the thing just goes away. But in the fiction of the universe, if you're trying to extrapolate, like, what's actually happening, Mario pockets the coin and Banjo eats the honey. And so for it to do different things, it would need that to mean that you're absorbing the butterfly in two different ways, and I think both ways just seem to be eating it. So, I don't know. There's a lot there that I think I can get hung up about. But the general idea of taking everything that you would need energy for and making it just one collectible, that part of Butterflies is good. I like that because a lot of the things that Yooka-Laylee do are recontextualized, or I guess it's the first time they're doing it, so they're just contextualized to be energy based rather than ammunition based.
Yeah,
and so that is good. Although, okay, I'm waffling here because then there's also the idea of like, should you need energy to roll and should you need energy to sonar? Maybe those are things that are. It seems like you could attach energy cost to them, or not. And I'd like to see like, what if you just let the player do them whenever they want? Because there's already an implicit control cost with rolling, where it's faster, but it's less accurate.
Sure. So
it already kind of comes at a cost. And also it's just like eating a butterfly. That's a little that's a little much for me sometimes when I think about it too hard. Just like, because Yooka-Laylee aren't humans; they're just also animals, and the animals in this game seem to be pretty intelligent.
Animals do eat animals, though, so it happens. It's
but not intelligent ones usually. Usually there's some peg lower than them on the intelligence rating, and just like if a chameleon can be a certain amount of intelligent, why can't a butterfly?
Well, the butterflies seem pretty happy about being eaten, just like the orange in Banjo-Kazooie seemed to be delighted by the fact that it was about to be devoured. So
there is biological reasoning for that, though. Oranges and fruit in general are trying to be eaten. They have evolved to be delicious so that their seeds could be spread by animals, while animals don't feel the same way about being eaten. Ask any animal; they'll tell you the same thing. They're all somewhat against it.
I can't speak to why the butterflies have such a poor sense of self-preservation, but I do have a theory on why they not only provide health, but why they provide extra energy for the energy meter. And that is, what if these pink butterflies in the world of Yooka-Laylee excrete a very specific chemical that sort of serves as a amphetamine that hypes up Yooka-Laylee, sort of like some sort of steroid or booster or something, gets their heart rate going. Similar to the way like some toads secrete hallucinogenic chemicals. Same thing. So they brush up against them. That's why they all of a sudden have more energy to do the rolls or the sonar or whatever.
Yeah. What if?
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. That's my theory. At least.
So fiction reasons. I think.
Well, does that make it better for you?
I
just gave you a reason to accept it. So does that make it better for you? I don't care if it's not true.
There is an aspect of it that is now slightly better.
Okay, well, I'm glad
I'm not completely against him either. I think the idea of, having to basically wait around egg nests in Tui was never great.
Yeah.
Like, just because it was never hard to do. It just took time to collect all the different ammunition that you needed, and once you did that, like, why did you have to do that? Why was that fun? How did that benefit the player? So this is probably a step in the right direction.
Sure.
I think you can. There's always more work to be done on this kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So they do bring up Trouser again, and they talk about the fact that he's just kind of hanging about in the worlds, and he doesn't have any building or something. Like, there's no identifiable landmark for Trouser. And they talked a little bit about, originally there was a caravan he'd be in, but it was just, I think, cut for time reasons. They also do some light mocking about the never-ending wall of text that Trouser spits out, and how Andy Robinson wrote Trouser's dialogue and is responsible for just the incessant amount of words that Trouser speaks. And honestly, I can relate to this because when I wrote dialogue for Lobo Destroyo, which was the much delayed but still in development game, Kickstarter funded 3D platformer from Left Handed Games, one of the hardest things that I had to kind of get the hang of was realizing characters couldn't vomit entire paragraphs out of their mouths. I wanted to get so much in there, but there has to be an economy in your word usage in video games. And I don't think I ever quite got it right at the time, and I think I can talk about that, even though I am technically still under NDA. But but that's not giving away, too much, except that I am bad at writing, and I got better, maybe.
A glowing endorsement for the writing in the upcoming Lobo Destroyo.
I have a lot of good bits that I'm proud of. I'll say that much. But I think I've gotten better at it since I took over the DK Vine Twitter after Chad left. I feel like I'm much better at brevity. Not with podcast, obviously. Not with podcasts, but I can usually get a joke in like 3 sentences now, which is better than having to do the whole setup I used to have to do. Like, here's 5 paragraphs and joke.
Well, I recently spoke with Jamie Guy, actually, of Left-Handed Games.
Yeah.
And he seemed very positive about your dialogue, so I wouldn't worry about it so much.
Delightful. Okay, well, that pleases me to no end. I feel like I'm going to call my parents and tell them they shouldn't be disappointed in me. That will change Thanksgiving this year.
I love the idea of just telling someone, like, hey, I know you're mad at me. You shouldn't be. And just letting that ride. Like, hey, let's have you not be disappointed in me. That would be great if I can just convince people that. Fantastic.
They get into what you were talking about earlier, and this is, I think, the best discussion in this whole video of Tribalstack Tropics. An interesting discussion about the game's budget and why they couldn't do as much as the games they did at Rare.
Right.
And this is all about that, money on Kickstarter seems like a whole lot, but it really only goes so far, and that's minus taxes, credit card payments, Kickstarter's own cut. Because just like Patreon, Kickstarter does get a significant cut. It's not, it's I think reasonable considering they're running a business too. But all the same, you're not. You get a figure quoted. You're not actually getting all of that. And they had to be very picky on what they had to spend it on, and they had to stretch the budget out. And they're very upfront about this. That it's not them making excuses, but because the game was such a success that they can then build on the starting point here that was Yooka-Laylee and grow from there. And, it is a testament, I'll say, to what they were able to do with this game that I don't think people realize. And that's just how much of a financial constraint it was under. Because you were parsing earlier about, well, can Yooka-Laylee be considered an indie game? Well, I don't really know like where that bar is set, but they definitely had more resources than your typical indie studio startup or whatever, but it was still a startup. The team had a lot of pedigree, and they were able to get some, backers, some investment, but it was not like they were operating under Nintendo and Microsoft budgets. They were doing this on their own. They formed Playtonic, and when a game is as polished, looks as polished, and plays as polished as something like Yooka-Laylee, you can kind of forget that. You're comparing it to these games that they made with Nintendo and Microsoft. You're comparing it with contemporaries like Super Mario Odyssey. But really, I mean, it's what these developer commentaries helped me remember, and that's that this didn't come out of thin air. This was not pulled from a vacuum, and because they were able to do such a good job with it, people were able to nitpick its flaws and questioning design choices or whatever, and you don't really have the luxury of doing that if you just get a bad game. If you just get a bad game, then it's a bad game, and you can't nitpick it because the whole thing is trash. Right? Like, it's...
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, like, there's ways to view budget and
right.
There's ways to view budgets and video games in ways that are neither dismissive to a studio's potential to work on a game or too expectatious of that studio. But really, I think there's just a certain amount of barrier to entry to 3D platformers that will never be what 2D platformers are now. It's not like in 20 years we'll get the kind of indie 3D platformers that are just coming out all the time in the 2D platforming sphere right now with like Celeste, Super Meat Boy, Hollow Knight, like great foundational amazing 2D platformers, like top of the line. And now they're just coming out of smaller budgets and smaller teams and on smaller scales now. I don't know if you'll ever get there with 3D platformers, because it's not just waiting for technology to become accessible enough on that scale. It is a little bit that, but it's also like everything in the game still needs to be made. Everything in the game still needs to be constructed. At some point, that's just time, and technology can't help you. So I would be interested to see, like, maybe for Playtonic's next game, they could do almost anything, but I would wonder, like, maybe a less technologically intensive game is coming up next, so they can really put like all of their current resources on it, and then the next time they do a 3D platformer, rather, be that 1 or 2 or 3 games in the future after that, they'll have built back up to having a really, really strong foundational... Not that they aren't already strong, but like they'll have a really solid base to work on that kind of high fidelity 3D platforming genre of a game.
It is astonishing when you really think that the first game they made right out of the gate was a 3D platformer.
Yeah.
Because you're right, like that the barrier of entry to that is actually pretty huge. And I think our collective perspective as Rare fans is skewed when it comes to this, because, you know, I've been thinking a lot about Donkey Kong 64. 20th anniversary is coming up. When it went on the Virtual Console a couple years back, we did our Spotlight episodes on it, and we were brutal on the game. And I think part of that was to atone for the baby versions of DK Vine, praising it without merit. But we were still pretty brutal on it, and we were comparing it to Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie, which are much more polished, fun 3D platformers. But, you know, I'm starting to come around to the view that Donkey Kong 64 is only really a bad game when you compare it to other games in the genre. But when you like play it by itself, it's not a bad game. It has flaws, absolutely, but it's not like this piece of trash. It has polish. It has aspects I really like, and we've never really had an out and out just terrible, atrocious game in our little Rare fandom. And what's really helped me come to this realization is our friend Josh Wallen from Off of the Geek Critique. His video on Sonic 06 kind of put this into perspective for me that, wait a second, like, I'm so hard on Donkey Kong 64, but you compare it to something like this, Donkey Kong 64 is in no way this dire. So, I don't know, I feel like sometimes our measuring stick is a little bit too tall when we're picking apart these games. For some fans, the world is not enough. You know, you've been given everything on a silver platter, and they're still going to find a way to nitpick it. And I look at the criticisms leveled at Yooka-Laylee, a Kickstarter-funded game from a startup studio, and I look at how they were able to accomplish so much with comparatively so little, especially the resources that they once had under Nintendo and Microsoft. And I don't know, like, I feel like that puts it into a whole new light for me. And I can recognize flaws where they exist, but it makes me respect the game a whole hell of a lot more. It makes me enjoy the game a whole hell of a lot more, because those little flaws are just little imperfections that I don't think really should take away from the greater achievement that this game was.
I don't know if I can get on the
really
DK64 is good train.
Oh,
but...
I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it has merits. It has certain merits. I'm not saying Donkey Kong 64 is good. I'm saying it's not a bad game. And I'm using bad game as like just unplayable trash that just like completely shackles the franchise for years to come in poor public perception.
I still don't know if I would go that far to say it's not bad, but I do agree with the general idea that expectations of certain things can be out of whack. Although I think there is a certain amount of onus on people in positions of marketing and reporting on games where and even just developers stating their goals. If your goal is to make a follow-up to Banjo-Kazooie, the comparison is fair. I think it is, because otherwise, what is Yooka-Laylee? You can't just say it's this game that is only tangentially related to Banjo-Kazooie. It's very related to Banjo-Kazooie. And, and the comparison exists, and I think it is fair for most people to say that it is a worse game than Banjo-Kazooie. That said, an understanding of why some things might not be at your level of expectations, and certainly not being mad about this thing that isn't really related explicitly to your life, is important. Keeping your expectations in check and keeping your emotions at a level of reasonability. It's so important.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing for like blindly praising whatever you're playing. I'm not arguing for ignoring flaws where they exist. But I'm also like, gaming is a weird subculture, because if anything is not like considered a flawless masterpiece, it's considered a piece of trash, more or less. And we can't like coolly detach ourselves and able to process anything. And really, this is kind of spread into all media at this point, you know. But it's just funny how unforgiving, how we're all so hypercritical of anything we consume, and we demand like perfection, ignoring all of the circumstances involved. And we can't like praise our genuine artistic achievements for where they exist in the circumstances they're born from. I don't know. I think I lost you when I said Donkey Kong 64 was a good game.
Yeah, I just got so hung up. Well, I mean, my main thing there is also, I've been saying this for years. Like, to say something is or is not good is only necessarily even valid at a micro level when you are looking at like not only just parts of a thing, but parts of those parts of that thing, keeping in mind the goal that they had for that part. So like to say something as complex as an entirely huge interlocking system like a video game is just purely good or bad is beyond my ability. I can't do it, which is why when I write a review, I don't include a score.
Yeah, scores are bullshit. It's just it's all made up. It's that really is all it is. And if you have a beef with a game, then you can really sink it by giving a poor score that's unwarranted. I look back at what GameSpot did when Tropical Freeze came out. And, you know, it's just, I'm not like one of these people who are like, oh, you know, the inherent bias, and now they don't like this thing that I like, so boo hoo 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 hoo. I'm just saying, like, I think as fans, not even as critics, as fans, being more coolly detached and, one, not caring what other people think, but also, like, recognizing that the people who make these are actual people, that these don't just appear out of thin air, and like looking at all of the turmoil and strife that went into the development of a game, which even beyond Playtonic, you know, you hear all these horror stories about these big studios and all the crunch time and ridiculous conditions that people are making games in, bordering on sweatshops. And it just makes me really want to give a hug to everybody involved, even in a game like I don't even care about. So I don't know. We really went off track here.
Yeah, you know, it happens.
It does. It does. Why don't we move on briefly to Rextro 64us? They bring up the idea that Rextro should have a father who is a scaling sprite dinosaur from the 16-bit era, and a grandfather who's an 8-bit sprite, and so on and so forth. And that would be a really clever thing that I would welcome in future games if they just expanded the whole Rextro family to include every generation of gaming. a little bit of like Cranky Kong-esque possibilities in that idea. So they have a discussion about like Easter eggs and the backgrounds of the worlds, like all of the little details in the background. Like there's a corplet head in one of the cliff faces that you can see, like just in the like off Tribalstack Tropics in the far distance, and just the background art, and how that everything inside a Grand Tome isn't just the area that's traversable by Yooka-Laylee, but actually is supposed to exist that far out too. Like there's stuff happening out there within the lore, the in-universe aspect of the game that we're just not privy to. And then that leads into a question about the end of the game, where Capital B and Dr. Quack get sucked into a Grand Tome that has the same artwork as Tribalstack Tropics. And the team does cop to the fact that they ran out of time and just reused the art for it, and that they might even have changed it had the game not been out now across 4 platforms, including the Switch.
My interpretation of that scene never even took into account that it could be a reuse of assets. I always had assumed, like, yeah, why Tribalstack Tropics? Why are they there? Interesting. In a way that made me sure, like, that specific world is going to come back in some way, because that's where they are. That's where those characters are.
This discussion did, like, open up the idea in my mind that maybe Capital B and Dr. Quack are on one of those, like, far islands, floating islands in the distance that you can't get to and they can't get off of as a result. So they're kind of in prison there, and there's no discernible path back at the moment. So if that's the case, well, you can have that one for free if it's not Playtonic. I don't care. Have it. But that's a possibility. That's a way out of that little continuity error there. And they also have a discussion about the Grand Tomes and if they're real locations or worlds contained inside of the books. And Gav is super vague about it, but he seems to have an idea in his head that he's not sharing. But yeah, my idea and understanding is always that they were books that were brought to life, and the world exists within the book, like a portal, like a little dimensional pocket. But it only exists within that tome, and then whatever's bleeding out into the Ivory Towers overworld.
Yes, that's my assumption too. Which would go against what the worlds in Kazooie are, where Kazooie are. They seem to be real world places that Grunty has portals to. Where these books,
right?
The worlds are the books in this case. So. Yeah. There's a bit of a divide there.
Which I feel like is cleaner.
Of course, yeah. If there's anything that doesn't make sense, it's like, how can a character that's like written into one book ever leave and then go into a different book where they aren't written? But I think just because of the way Yooka and Laylee go between books, it's fine. It works out.
The old DK Vine standby. It's fine. It just move on. Yeah. Bring up the Knights of Camelot again. So Kev Bayless was behind the design of these pigs, and Gav, this is where he talks about having a game concept for the Knights of Camelot, and he has a document that exists, and he's not sharing it, but apparently all of their attributes, like having an archer, for example, all fits within the game concept that may or may not ever see development one day, which I don't know how well a Knights of Camelot game would do. Like, how could you market that? Like, here are these weirdo pigs who think it's a Ren fair.
Yeah, it would have to be it would have to be a very specific genre of game that appeals to a lot of people in spite of almost completely in spite of the main characters. You know, maybe they'll show up in Fortnite one day. That seems to be pretty popular. Thanos is in that game, so why not?
And Thanos is definitely popular, so yeah sure. Little interesting design discussion about how Yooka-Laylee was made, and they bring up there's a hallway that exists in the Rampo Temple beneath Rampo, but it just leads to a dead end. Like there's nothing there, no collectibles. And Stephen Hurst says that he put it in the game for the designers to hide something, but they never did, and Hamish Lockwood admits that he didn't even know it was there. So
yeah, it's that kind of thing that I think might improve in the future now that the team is more locked in and maybe has a better way of communication going about.
A little bit of miscommunication that cracks me up, because I was wondering about that hallway and other little just design curiosities about Yooka-Laylee that I never really figured out. And it just sounds like it was the result of people working on one thing and then it not really being communicated to the person who was that they thought was going to take over and make some use out of that. So they talk about the Dr. Puzz transformation of the flower and how the rudely executed way of that's the way they phrased it, of pollinating the other flowers. And apparently they toned it down because they say it was much worse in the original, and I don't know in what context that is. I did make a video on our YouTube channel that made it much more explicit. I hope that was true to the original vision, but I can't say for sure.
It makes you wonder how bad fur day they were going to go at any one point in this game, because it seems to be like they just, compared to their old stuff, they were a lot less worried about Nintendo seeing it, because this game is not being published by Nintendo. Also, it's just a different era where I think being a little rude and like cracking wise is just more accepted by people.
Is it though? I feel like we've almost kind of gotten away from that, especially as we've gotten away from the late 90s to like mid-aughts.
Well, I think parts of it have, like, being just lewd and I don't know, somewhat sexual or whatever, or having violence in a thing. People don't care about that at all. People care about that like almost nothing. But you know, if you're and rightfully so, if you're hateful in any way, we are much more sensitive to it. Which is probably the way both of those things should go. Except violence, I guess. Like in a theoretical perfect world, you'd be more upset about someone like killing someone than them having sex, but not the ESRB. The ESRB is really they really hate sex and they love murder. They really love murder.
If I can be honest, this is why on the Kongversation there's usually a sex joke in every episode, but so far I have not killed anybody.
Well, there's that intro person to the show, but yeah, we as individuals, as hosts, have not yet done it.
He is a freelancer, and I don't have any association with him besides the contract that we regrettably signed. So, but besides that, no murders have transpired by my hand. It's me taking a stand against the ESRB and other forces that say violence is more acceptable than consensual sex. I feel like that is nonsense.
Sure.
All right, so let's move on. They get into Shovel Knight and just how that came about, which is just they asked Yacht Club and they said yeah, because they had seen Shovel Knight in a bunch of other crap, and Yacht Club was like, sure, yeah, we actually backed it on Kickstarter, Yooka-Laylee, so yeah, you can have Shovel Knight. What I did find interesting there was they actually did the model for Shovel Knight and then Playtonic animated it, so that's actually how that came about. But then they talk about really what I want to discuss, the whole point of us discussing Tribalstack Tropics to begin with, and that's that fucking quill, Mitchell.
Yes.
In my show notes, this is just me, stream of consciousness, as I was listening to the videos, I wrote, in all caps, the fucking quill, and then I indented, and I wrote, fuck you. I indented again, I said, Kev Bayless was responsible. I indented again, and I said, fuck you, once more.
Yeah.
That was my immediate emotional response to hearing that Kev Bayless was responsible for that solitary quill that was hiding in a completely random corner around Shovel Knight. Just completely unintuitive, just completely... Like, when you talk about bad game design, that's what people are talking about. That quill right there.
I found it. I don't...
yeah, I mean, I found it, but like...
It's one of those that, like, the way I look for collectibles in a 3D platformer is I comb around the area I don't think I should be going next. And then usually, by the time I do all the things I want to do, I'll have been going in the areas I didn't think I was going to go ahead of those things. So I'll be like done-ish. So when I saw that, like, oh, there's this ledge I can theoretically go to, I'm just going to do that. And I ended up finding that quill. But finding that quill down there freaked me out so bad because I assumed I was in, like, no man's land. I assumed I wasn't even supposed to be there, like, with the level geometry and everything. So finding that quill made me think, like, oh man, am I gonna have to do this for every ledge on this floating island? Like, everywhere ever? And I did for a while, but then I realized, no, I guess it's just one. I guess it's just one quill. They probably shouldn't have done it.
No, I was irritated by it at first, but I also kind of respect it in a weird way. Because they bring up that Kev Bayless and Steve Mails, they got to put down quills, and when they did, I think everybody got to, like, play a hand in putting down quills into the worlds. They kind of, like, spread that task around, and apparently because they're such old school gamers, you know, Kev Bayless having worked on Battletoads, they just had sort of this manic glee in being as dickish as possible to gamers, and they even refer to it here in the video as the Battletoads quill. But Gav says that they would avoid doing things like that in the future, especially post Super Mario Odyssey. So I think that's for the best. Again, it's like recognizing a game's flaws, but also not letting it derail your enjoyment of the game, because it doesn't make it a bad game. It just makes that little aspect of the game slightly irritating and less than stellar. But like, it doesn't upset me. It kind of makes me smirk a little bit too. So
it's interesting that they would make the connection between Odyssey in this specific way.
Yeah,
because Odyssey has these purple coins in every level. Sometimes there's only 50 in the smaller levels, but in the bigger levels there's 100. I had a much harder time collecting all of the purple coins in Odyssey than I did collecting the quills in Yooka-Laylee. And I still, in Yooka-Laylee, I'd still run into, like, oh man, I only have 3 left, and I looked everywhere. Okay, where's this gonna be? But, like, that's to be expected. And I think it's also on me for wanting to be a completionist in the face of, like, a micro collectible that I don't know if you should be a completionist to. But yeah, I honestly thought that both Odyssey and Yooka-Laylee used their, like, smaller collectibles in a way that maybe Kazooie had done. Well, I don't want to compare it to Kazooie again in this way, but, like, Kazooie used their notes as guidelines. So it was never about actually making collecting notes a task. The notes would be something you were just doing on the way to the thing that was a task. And in this game, the quills are a task, to the point where it makes it feel a little bit like, well, what's the difference, really, between a quill and a pagey? I know I need to get everything, so the reward is, like, negligibly different, because I still need both things about as much for a 100% complete playthrough. And the finding of them isn't that different, because they can just be anywhere, apparently. But Odyssey, I would almost say Odyssey's worse about that specific thing. So I it's weird that they would bring that up there.
Interesting. I don't know. I feel like something like this one random quill would be better served for a collectible that's similar to, like, say, the hero coins of Donkey Kong Country 2, where it is
the pirate treasure.
The pirate treasure,
easily
right?
Could have been the pirate treasure's location.
But just having it be one quill that's totally unintuitively hidden away from the other quills, it is kind of a cheap stunt. Well, talking about things I didn't like as well, Kartos.
Okay.
So they talk a little bit about the character, and Gav mentions how he doesn't feel like they had enough time to spend on the minecart gameplay. And this has been a big problem with me and Kartos, getting the hang of that control scheme. And my brain has never really synced up with it. And I know that's on me. That's my defect as a gamer, and probably not on Playtonic. But it just made Kartos something I actively dreaded. despite like looking forward to this aspect of the game quite a bit when it was announced on the Kickstarter. And they do cop to the fact that they felt obligated to have it since they had it in the Kickstarter. And any other time they might have potentially cut this from the game entirely when they felt like it wasn't quite working out to what they originally foresaw. And because of that, they might have made it a bit too complicated with all the obstacles and enemies and nuance and, oh, you jump and, oh, but there's a barrel. And rather than just having a fun romp experience, like high-speed experience, they put too many bits in there to compensate. And that's kind of where it might have fallen apart a bit. Which was good to hear, because I just cannot get on board with card toss. I've tried. I'm sorry. I want to like it. I really do. I just can't. It's the one pagey I usually try to save for last, because it's just...
Yeah, and in this specific level, and maybe up to the third one or so, it's manageable, but by those last two levels, Kartos just gets to be such a hard thing to get through.
Capital Casino, it's the boss. Like, oh,
yeah.
man, God, oh. Eh.
Although I like that boss, it's just still, the controls are so hard. It's such a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Well, speaking of bosses, they have a nice discussion about Rampo, the boss of Tribalstack Tropics, and the best quote from Gavin, and I had to write this down verbatim. Gavin on Rampo says, "It's ridiculous. How on earth can you fight a ramp? We found a way. Oh yes. Take that, Red Dead Revolver 2. Take that, Breath of the Wild."
Now, did Gavin mess up the name of Red Dead Redemption 2, or was that you?
I'll have to go back and check.
Okay.
But I believe I quoted him verbatim. If not, apologies. Could have been me, but I'm not gonna edit that bit out. So I'll just roll the dice and we'll find out.
Yeah, I like Rampo. Do you like Rampo?
I like Rampo. I loved the Rampo fight. It was definitely. I realized I had gotten the hang of the rolling mechanism here versus the toy box. When I did Rampo, I was like, oh wait, yeah, this is pretty easy. Apparently during Hamish's interview with Gavin for a job at Playtonic, Gavin mentioned that the first boss of the game was a ramp, and Hamish thought he was joking. Then he saw that no, he was not joking. And we actually saw what Rampo looked like at that time when they released the other screenshot on the second anniversary from the early build, when Rampo was just a big cube with a stupid like face on it. So you can check that out. Playtonic has it on their website. We also did a news story about it on DK Vine.
Now, do you think... I know this is maybe either completely up to interpretation or it's been answered in some way that I have not seen. The part of Rampo that you fight is the very top. But is he the whole ramp?
I don't believe so. I think it's just the stone head. I think
okay.
He just built atop a ramp, and I don't know why the ramp is the most distinguishing part of his identity. It would be like if you were like Mitchell the floor man because you're standing on a floor.
Well, it's more like Mitchell the body because my head is built atop a body.
Yeah, but I don't think like he can feel anything on the ramp, right? Like if a lizard and a bat are rolling up you would feel that because your nervous system, it's all connected. But I feel like Rampo is just a stone idol on top of him.
Do you know he doesn't feel it, though?
I don't know, because honestly, this didn't come up in the game. The only thing that came up in the game was his distaste for salesmen, which was brought in by Andy Robinson, who apparently hates door-to-door salesmen so much that he made it the distinguishing feature of the big stone head idol godman, rather than getting into details about whether or not he feels things down on his ramp.
I mean, well, there's always a sequel.
I guess Rampo isn't dead. He just got knocked over, because you can mess with him a little bit afterward. Like, you can mess with him on his eye a bit, and he complains about it. I don't know. Interesting discussion for me, though, after the Rampo bit, was how they mentioned that in the early Kickstarter build and what they showed behind closed doors to the press at E3 2015, they had a more stylized Mario-esque look for Yooka-Laylee, with floating platforms and everything else. But they, and I remember that at the time, and I remember being a little let down. I was like, oh, that doesn't really look like a Rare game. That looks more like Mario. I'm still looking forward to it, but, you know, you have certain expectations. And, but apparently they listened to the feedback from the fans, And they realized that what we wanted was a more naturalistic, rare-like atmosphere akin to Banjo or Donkey Kong. And that's why things like the floating platforms have propellers on the bottom. And they just a stupid little explanation for why things are the way they are, rather than just video game magic or it being an obstacle course. And that internal logic has always been a hallmark of Rare and now Playtonic. And trust me, it is much appreciated as a fan of these studios, because it makes the whole experience of playing the game feel like I am in a tangible world that exists. Like, down to those stupid little details, like them having an underwear catalog. Why would they have that? It's stupid, doesn't add anything, but it makes me feel like the world is real and that I have more emotional stakes in it, rather than just mechanically going through a video game trying to get to the end so I can say I beat it or I have the highest score or whatever. That has no appeal to me. I'm a guy who lives for the narrative and the world building, and
that naturalistic vibe is part of why Nuts and Bolts for me didn't really quite do it, because there are a lot of differences between the original Banjo games and Nuts and Bolts, but one thing that I really loved about Banjo-Tooie is how much of a real world it felt like, and that was a specific thing they seem to not want to carry into Nuts and Bolts. I'm glad that they caught that early in the development for this one.
Absolutely.
It seems, because I think Tribalstack Tropics still kind of has some of it going on, but then Glitterglaze Glacier and Capital Casino are so much more natural. I mean, Capital Casino, it seems weird to call that more natural, but like it is. It's human man-made things are natural parts of our world, and they seem to be natural parts of their world as well, and just seeing how those things work and are seemingly palpable, real things that you can't just kind of look past and generalize of that's magic. That does benefit Yooka-Laylee.
And as much as I've come around on Nuts and Bolts, that is still probably my biggest hang up, the artifice of the worlds there, which is baked into the idea of the game, that these are all logs, little worlds he's built, but it really makes it less interesting for me as a result, and I don't like that, because I really like the best part of Nuts and Bolts for me is Showdown Town, and I don't like that, because that's not where the heart of the game lies. So
it's admittedly also a lot more difficult in HD than it was on the N64 to
Sure.
do something like that, because
Sure.
on the N64 you could just have a wall to a level be a texture of trees on a flat surface, and you just have to understand you can't walk past that. That doesn't really fly anymore so much. You would need a reason why a character can't walk past a certain area. And, it does seem to be that the additional power and fidelity is a little bit of a crutch in making something seem more realistic, because you need to go all the way all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's why I like Sea of Thieves' explanation. Oh, it's the Devil's Shroud. It's this whole there's this whole stupid lore around it, just so they have a reason why you don't sail forever. They give, I don't know if this is a misleading hint from Gav, but he suggests that the Nimble, the racing cloud, could show up in a future Playtonic game where racing is the theme, because that is something that fans, I think, are speculating on, what would Playtonic's next game be? And everybody kind of pinpoints a racer, because that seems like it would be a fan appealing follow-up project for them to do a racer. And then Hamish tries to throw that off by saying that he's actually referring to a golf game, which I would also be okay with. I would love to see Playtonic do a golf game. And then finishing up Tribalstack Tropics, there's this weird little anecdote from Gav where he says that they spent thousands on trademark and IP protection, which is something that they never really had to do or think about when they were under Nintendo and Microsoft, because somebody in the middle of Europe tried to claim the Yooka-Laylee trademark out from under them. It's a terrifying prospect when you're a startup, and
yeah.
apparently, I didn't know this. Yooka-Laylee, the name Yooka-Laylee came from a fan suggestion because Project Yooka-Laylee wasn't actually in reference to the game going to be called Yooka-Laylee. Project Yooka-Laylee was just completely unrelated, and then a fan made the joke that, oh, is the game going to be called Yooka-Laylee, spelled out like it is, and they thought that was brilliant, and then they went with that.
I think I've heard that somewhere before.
I never heard that, but you probably travel in wider circles than I do.
Well,
so
probably not when it comes to Yooka-Laylee. I think we probably travel in literally the exact same size circles, being whoever we meet at E3.
Yeah, probably, yeah. Checking in with the live stream, it says that Angry Ancestor, once again, says that in relation to the Knights of Hamelot, that feels like the pun came before the characters. Knights of Hamelot, haha, that's funny, let's make pig knights. Which it sounds about accurate. I don't know, I wasn't there. All right, well, let's move on to Glitterglaze Glacier, which is going to be the last video we do for this episode because, hey, this is getting way too long. We're just going to have to deal with it. To be continued next time. Glitterglaze Glacier was their third developer commentary, featuring Daley Johnson, engagement director, Gavin Price, studio head, Gary Talbot, animator, Dean Wilson, background artist, Hamish Lockwood, designer. And so, entering Glitterglaze Glacier, the glide ability is the free Trouser move that you have to use to advance here. However, this mandate from Gavin took a while to be implemented by Dean, and you can actually still make it over the water without ever using the glide ability, which they then demonstrate in the video.
Yeah.
Which I was able to do, too, like, right away. And that's something that I noticed throughout Yooka-Laylee was sometimes you could kind of outsmart the game and kind of break things by doing different moves that actually wasn't the laid out intention, which I still don't really have a problem with it. I didn't have a problem with it at the time. I thought it was like, it made it more, I don't know, sandboxy as a result, rather than like everything is deliberate and rigid. I can see where people would have a problem with that, but it still doesn't bug me too much. It only bugs me in one instance, and that's when you learn the flappy flight maneuver, and you can go back into previous worlds and just fly up to where you couldn't get before, because it makes all of these other moves feel redundant and just completely worthless at that point.
This is just an extension of Yooka and Laylee being so powerful. They by the end of the game, or really even just like halfway through the game, they can do so many things that affect their mobility and their ability to just get higher up or faster or anything you need to be. Which I wonder if that was a conscious decision or if it just kind of ended up like that they got so powerful. They do. Gavin Price does concede that the difference between a gap that you need to glide across and a gap that you can just do the jump combo across is maybe only 3%. I'm sure that's an exaggeration, but it does, I think, speak to just how, even at a base level, how able Yooka and Laylee are just everywhere.
Yeah, and that makes them really fun to play as, and like even the Flappy Flight, which I just critiqued and criticized, I still very much enjoy doing that move. It's fun to fly around. It kind of breaks certain aspects of it, and you just kind of have to ask yourself how much that will ruin your enjoyment of the game when that time comes. And, you know, it doesn't matter at this point if you're just playing through in a linear fashion because you don't have all the moves, so you just make do with what you've got, and I think that makes the game more enjoyable. But yeah, you have to ask yourself, should they have toned this down, or should they have thought about that before implementing it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Obviously, Glitterglaze Glacier was inspired by the movie Frozen, which we've always known about because Dean Wilson's little girl, like, would always watch it on a loop. But he was also influenced by the first game he worked on at Rare, and that's Cameo, which I hadn't really made that visual connection until this video, and I realized that. I was like, oh, I definitely see the Cameo influence. And Cameo is not a game I'm really that well versed in, but I still appreciate like seeing the little nods there. I
don't know if I ever consciously made that connection, but after they said that, like, of course, it's an obvious connection to Cameo. The castles look very similar. The castle in Cameo and the castle in Glitterglaze Glacier have the same sort of rounded edge DNA kind of thing going on. So there's definitely some connection there, and I think that's great. That's one of Cameo's strongest areas, probably, just the visual identity.
Yeah, I feel bad that I don't, like, my gaps in rare knowledge. Like, I don't know much about Cameo, and that's just because it's not a game DK Vine covers because of our own rigid bylaws. But I need to play it. It's there for me to play. I just haven't got around to it.
It is my favorite post-buyout rare game.
Is it?
Yeah, I love Cameo.
That's a big, bold statement to make. Wow. I'll have to put more time into it because I have played it, obviously. I just, didn't really play it to completion or really play it much since it came out. Dean Wilson is also apparently well known for his rocks. He's always the go-to guy to design rocks, and apparently some of his rocks are actually in Sea of Thieves because he developed for that before he made the jump to Playtonic. So if you see any similarities between the rocks here in Yooka-Laylee and Sea of Thieves, that is why. And they mention the term orange point lighting so many times during this commentary episode that I believe if you took a shot every time they say it, you would probably find yourself in a hospital or a morgue, because it becomes a running joke that Dean Wilson really liked the orange point lighting, and he wanted the lighting here to be dramatic and stand apart from Tribalstack Tropics, which is the whole reason they did a snow world, a wintry kind of fantasy world right after the sunny tropical jungle world.
It works. It all of the levels end up having a really distinct color palette, and that orange point lighting is probably a big part of what makes this this winter level look as cold and wintry as it does.
And I honestly, like, the look of Glitterglaze Glacier, I think might be the best in the game. I think just visually it might be the most impressive. I don't know if I'll actually stand by that. This is just me kind of shooting from the hip, but yeah, I don't know. It has a very rich tapestry of colors and contrast that I really enjoy. So they give Gary Talbot, this is the first instance in these commentary tracks where they give Gary Talbot some ribbing for being absolutely rubbish at games. This becomes a running joke then where they give him the controller and they watch him flail about horrifically. But I can sort of relate because I'm actually pretty bad at most video games. I'm definitely the worst gamer on DK Vine, which is awful because I run DK Vine. But I've let my gaming skills kind of atrophy because I'm so busy writing about games and recording podcasts about games that I barely have any time to play games. So I'm kind of glad there is somebody who is actually working at Playtonic and who worked on Yooka-Laylee that is also not very good at video games. It makes me feel like I'm not such a weird outlier.
You, Chad, and I all played a level of The Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes together at E3 2015. Yeah. And I was astounded at how bad at games you were.
Thank you.
Yeah, you had a fun new level there.
I appreciate that. That's
proficiency.
Because it's one thing if I'm self-deprecating, but it means a whole lot more when it's coming from somebody else.
Yeah, I just wanted the audience out there to know, like, no, he's not just playing it. Everyone plays their own abilities down a little bit. Now you could be trusted in playing down your own abilities because you have some extra source.
I am who I am, Mitchell. I love myself for who I am, and it's okay that I'm bad at games because at the very least I can make the complex continuity and character connections that everybody else misses. So
that's all you need.
We're all good at something, right?
Yeah, probably. I don't know.
I don't know.
Babies don't seem good at, like, anything.
Why do we even have babies, really?
Why do we have babies?
Kiddy Kong is the worst Kong, and that's usually the metric I compare everything to. Oh, wait, how does this apply to Donkey Kong? Well, Kiddy Kong is the worst Kong, so ergo, babies are terrible. Anyway, they spend some time in that cavern that's too cold to stand in unless they heat it up, with the fire pits and whatever. Then they expand the tome, and then they show the bit with the ice keys, which is a deliberate reference. Like, we didn't need that spelled out for us, that was a banjo reference with the ice keys that unlock the icy metric palace and also the bottom cavern. So why the icy metric palace? I remember this being a point of contention I had when the game came out and I first played Glitterglaze Glacier. I remember not caring for the icy metric palace at all at the time. Now, this was mostly from Gav. He came up with the icy metric palace pun, and he wanted to do an isometric area because he loved that style of game from when Rare was Ultimate Play the Game. Like, that was their bread and butter at the time. So it was mostly just wish fulfillment from him to get to do... He wants to do a whole game about that eventually in that style, but just having this bit in Yooka-Laylee was like a dream come true for him. And I didn't like the Isometric Palace at first because I don't think my headspace I don't think I was in the right headspace for Isometric Palace when I played it, because I was expecting a 3D platforming, very traditional. And to have something like this really threw me off, especially so early in the game, the second world. And it's not something I've really grown to appreciate until I've really spent more time with the game. And really, like, that's, I think, what I find the most appealing about Yooka-Laylee now is how different every world feels. Where you've got like Capital Casino, which is very much stylized different than the other worlds, or here with the Isometric Palace, which takes up such a big part of Glitterglaze Glacier and feels so different from everything else. But I kind of appreciate that more. I'm not just looking for a throwback to the games of my youth. I'm actually looking for different experiences now. And so those are the bits of Yooka-Laylee that I find myself gravitating towards more as a result as time goes by. So
yeah, I also have some interesting feelings about the palace. I think that the palace design is really cool, and how it's all laid out, and how it I think they talked about Kickstarter backers at a certain level designing rooms.
Yes.
Yeah. That's really awesome. And I also just really like the outside of the palace, like the main body of Glitterglaze Glacier. I think Glitterglaze Glacier is probably my favorite level in the game, but not for the palace. It just like the general layout of that level does a lot for that kind of thing I was talking about, like the space between areas of interest, and being built in a way that is functionally intelligent, and that it does it really well. But so much of the actual body of that level is now in the palace that I've always kind of felt like, you took away from my favorite levels. Now that they're all the pages and quills and stuff are in this other part of the level. But again, going back to the game after 2 years, I think that's probably a good thing. It's definitely wholly unique to anything that was done in any Rare 3D platformer or Mario 3D platformer or anything that I've seen.
Yeah.
I guess the closest is like Grunty's Revenge, if that counts.
I don't think it does, but I mean, just by virtue of series, the connection there. But yeah, I don't know if you could really classify that as a 3D platformer. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, like I feel like that is where Yooka-Laylee is strongest, is when it really speaks with its own voice and just does its own thing. Be damned of whatever it's the spiritual successor to. So, and I didn't like Glitterglaze Glacier as much as the other worlds when I first played it. There's a couple different reasons for that, and some have been fixed, which we'll get into. But yeah, I think now, looking back, Glitterglaze Glacier might be my favorite world. That or Capital Casino. But it's funny the turnaround I've done on this after just having sit on it for 2 years. Didn't expect that to be the case, and it's. I mean, I'm perfectly fine with my opinions being fluid and evolving over time. If you go back and listen to my opinions on earlier seasons of the Conversation, they're entirely different from where I am today, and that's just part of human nature. We grow as people. We hopefully become better, and anything I say is only really has the permanence of that particular moment in time. So don't hold me to this if I turn on Glitterglaze Glacier in a year, but right now I kind of love it. But you mentioned the people who backed at a very, very high tier, higher than I backed. I backed it way over my budget, but these are the people who really had some cash to throw around, and they were able to design help design one of the rooms in Isometric Palace, and they got their name on a plaque. And I didn't realize like these were their actual real names. They didn't actually pun up their names at all. So you would get like a person with the last name of Weekwall, and that's actually their real last name. And I thought that was kind of staggering because I've never heard that surname before. But
it's way too convenient.
Yeah, right?
I read that as a hint the first time I played it, so I thought like every room would have a hint in the plaque. But then when one of them was called Solstice, I couldn't figure out anything having to do with a solstice in that room, so I just started ignoring them.
I thought it had something to do with the sun or like blotting out the sun. I was so lost there. And their last name is Solstice. What? Who has that name? Like, that's... How are all the people who were able to back at that tier have such ridiculous made-up sounding names? It completely threw me off. But I guess those are the perils of Kickstarter funding, right? So they get to the boss, Breeze Block, and Daly mentions that he looks like a thwomp from Mario. At the exact same moment, I realized he looks like a thwomp from Mario, and now I can't unsee that he looks like a thwomp from Mario, and it kind of ruins Breeze Block for me.
Rampo also kind of looks like a thwomp from Mario, and I think that goes around. Putting eyes on a cube is not
Sounds like you've got thwomps coming down on you right now, Mitchell.
Yeah, I got some things going on up there.
Speaking of those things, did you hear I had teenagers having sex right out front of my my office this week?
No.
Yeah, teenagers having sex in the car next to my car. And I don't know if like the local neighborhood teenagers are using DK Vine as like a hookup spot. Like, oh, they record that Donkey Kong podcast in there. Let's get it on. But it's disconcerting.
Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't be certing.
No, not at all.
Yeah, you had the appropriate reaction to it, probably.
So
whenever teenagers do anything anymore, I just feel like I'm finally really out of their world, so I don't even know if they could be reading a magazine just chilling in a room, and I if I was in that room, I'd think like, is this a teens only area? Should I I shouldn't be here.
No, you'd be creepy if you were.
They could just be like doing taxes. They could be doing adult things, and I'd still feel like teens only.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, the racket. Sorry, the racket just reminded me that there might be similar rackets going on right outside, and I'm a little bit scared to even check at the moment. Like I don't. It's funny. It's funny, but I don't want to have to be parking my car outside and think, oh, I just drove through somebody's sex vapors. I don't have to be thinking about that. Like that's like
even from the inside of a car.
Yeah, no, it's the same air, right? Kind of. It's getting displaced. Yeah, I mean it filters through. I don't need that in my life. I have enough to worry about. E3 is coming up. I don't need to be starting to worry about what's happening right outside. All right. Moving back to Breeze Block, there's a question later in this video about boss fight placement and whether it was a design philosophy to not have to play the bosses until the end, sort of the Banjo mindset over the Donkey Kong 64 mindset, where in Banjo-Tooie, like the boss battles were more just wherever, like potentially in the middle of the world, where Donkey Kong 64, the world culminated with the boss battles. And Gav says he's a fan of boss fights and doesn't think they should have to be saved until the end of the world, because if you like those challenges and want to attempt them, you shouldn't be forced to do all of the other bits first, which I had never really considered, because I think I view games just based on my completionist tendencies as a very linear thing. I try to make it as linear as possible when I can. I'm in this world, let me try to get everything I can at this particular moment. So the whole notion that, oh, what if you could just fight bosses whenever, has always felt like kind of contradictory to the way my brain is wired. But at the same time, the way he put it, I was like, oh, I kind of respect that. I deliberately avoided the bosses in Yooka-Laylee, unless I like just stumbled into them by mistake, like in Capital Casino. But I would usually avoid them till the end, because in my mind, like, oh, the big boss battle, that's what ends the world. But maybe I can change my way of looking at things. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well, traditionally, boss battles have been used as ways to test the player before moving on. To say, like, this level was trying to teach, or at least test that you know this one thing. So at the end of it, we'll put a boss, and if you can beat the boss, then we have a fairly good understanding that you have a grasp on that idea. Whether that be a tool you have, or an obstacle in the world, or just a kind of gameplay tendency you should have picked up at that point. So if you don't do that, then there is no reason to put him at the end. If that's not what these bosses are about, and in Yooka-Laylee, the only boss that is like that is Capital B, it makes sense not to put them at the end, because the only thing Rampo tests is the roll, and the only thing that Breeze Block tests is the berry eating and fire use. So those aren't, and even calling those things tests would be maybe a little generous to what they are. They're just additional challenges, just like all the other pages in the game. They're just their own challenges. It's just that these challenges are personified in the form of a boss type character. So yeah, if you just like going up against characters like that, and you like those kinds of fights, then sure, I agree with Gavin. There is not necessarily any reason to put him at the end. Yeah,
it's all a matter of preference, whether that be design preference or player preference, and there's no like hard science behind it. It's all made up anyway, so why not?
Also, like, where's the end? You know, in a 3D platforming level, that's unless you make it really linear, like almost a 3D Mario 3D world kind of thing. There's no end. It's a big world to explore. It's just 3D space.
And I have to wonder if maybe the reason Donkey Kong 64 did it in a more linear fashion was because of the way the game started out in development, where it was designed to be more consciously linear, like the Donkey Kong Country games, before they just gave up and just patterned it after Banjo and Mario 64. But I don't know if maybe that was a design element that kind of just lingered as a result. Makes me question things. So Gav mentions that his favorite challenge, when we're talking about like doing individual tasks, he says his favorite challenge in the whole game is the Pagey in a Cagey in the darkened room in Icymetric Palace. That room with the water and the skulls, where the Pagey kind of acts as a game show host, like a really cheesy quiz show master. And I hadn't realized until watching these commentary videos, but how much each individual Pagey is imbued with a unique personality. Usually, like they're jackasses. But I'm not sure why I didn't pick up on the fact that Because, in Banjo-Kazooie, when you first collect a Jiggy, it talks to you, but after that, the Jiggies don't really ever talk. They're just inanimate objects. So to have, especially the Pages and Akages that interact with you, to have them all have unique personalities is something that I don't know why I didn't appreciate at the time I first played the game. But maybe the fact that they all have the same, design that as sheets of paper just made me oblivious to their written personalities. But I kind of want to pay more attention now to any nuances I missed or just glossed over at the first time.
Yeah, those pages are real cards, Hyle. They're real characters. Yeah. And when they were saying that thing about the game show pagey, I was wondering I don't really remember if I got it the first time or not. This is supposed to be specifically an old 80s or 90s game show host.
Yeah.
And I thought oh man, some really cheesy game show music right here would have been fun. That's just another budget thing, that'd be a whole other song.
Sure. Yeah, Grant Kirkhope isn't cheap, as they allude to. But also I remember how difficult that, because I wasn't expecting a quiz show when I went into that room, so having to be observant of all of these really, really specific details. It was more of a challenge. I mean, it didn't take me long to get through that, but it just unexpected. And I guess that's the benefit of having the whole KG concept around the pages, is that you could do weird stuff like that. And yeah. Speaking of characters that I quite love, community member Lake Konopaski wrote in to ask about the googly eyes and how they came about. The googly eye enemies that hop around and make their debut in this world. And by the way, Lake is a member of the DK Vine community. At least they post and reply and follow us on Facebook, because I interact with them all the time. And it's super amusing to me to see all of the recognizable names that popped up in these community questions. Just the smallness of our happy little community sometimes. It makes me feel warm and snuggly on the inside. Karn, who has since left Playtonic, coded the enemies. And the googly eyes, they were easy to animate because anything they took over would then be animated with the same squish and bounce movements. And of course, it's a meta reference to the rare style of sticking googly eyes on things and calling them a unique character, but this time they just made it a literal in-universe mechanic. And
right.
I know
this is another thing like the corplets that can appear everywhere, and just because they can put their eyes on anything, basically, that means that they can also be themed out just on all the different worlds.
Yeah.
Just because all the worlds have different items that they can be on.
Well, not just that, but it also adds a new element of danger, because you see those googly eyes and you see all of these props line about. So do you destroy the props first, or do you go for the googly eyes? What you have to kind of do a risk assessment, especially if you don't see any googly eyes around in the immediate area. But it's this snowman, we need to get rid of that, because if any googly eyes show up, then that's going to be a problem. And I know I've used the googly eyes as a retroactive explanation for so many past rare characters and baddies as a result. So it was a lovely gift that Playtonic gave me with these googly eyes. Probably one of my favorite just gonzo notions that Yooka-Laylee gave us. Big fan of those, and I like that they're the first things you see when you load up the game and they hop on the Playtonic logo.
Yeah, they're good. I love them a lot. I hope they become something of a stand-in company mascot for Playtonic.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I don't see why they should. I feel like they're already there just by virtue of the beginning of Yooka-Laylee, but I hope it's something they continue with. So they bring up the fact that Dean is the voice of Trouser, and then they have him do an impression, which is just one syllable. But then later on in the video, Gary does his capital B, since he was the voice of him. And then there's this weird bit where they do their respective characters, but in the context of them being in the bathroom together. I don't know. I feel like at that point, I'm like, wow, they're really making that Kickstarter stretch goal worthwhile here. Just simulating their own characters having bowel movements together. I feel like that's really why people put in so much of their money. And I'm not being sarcastic here. Genuinely, thank you, Playtonic. So this is interesting in the context of how we've been recording this episode, Mitchell. The office above Playtonic at this point starts making a racket that interferes with the audio of their recording. So I don't feel so bad now, and neither should you, about the attic men who have been intruding upon this entire episode so far. As it turns out, the office above Playtonic makes lifelike artificial limbs. Maybe that's what they're doing up there, Mitchell?
Maybe.
I don't know. Have you asked them what, like, are they making limbs?
And I've heard from a little bird that it's going to be the air conditioner they're working on. But what could be the case is that they're actually making fake limbs. Now, Dean did say that he smelled one, which I thought was hilarious. Like, that's a great way to deal with new things in your life. Just immediately going to smell them. It's
what dogs and cats do. You just walk up to it and you sniff it, and then you understand everything you need to know about it. It's how I meet new people. I don't shake hands. I sniff them, and that's probably why I don't make any new friends. But I think you're the last one I made, Mitchell.
You're just done. Sometimes I feel that way too. I am the last friend I'll ever make.
So I will refrain from going to the old DK Vine well and making a prosthetic golfing finger joke here, because I feel like that would be in poor taste, because they do good work here. Apparently, they make really lifelike limbs, and they're Playtonic's neighbor, and it's an important thing. Why should I belittle it? I won't.
You kind of did by bringing it up.
No, I'm saying I won't. I'm saying I won't be this hacky piece of shit DK Vine man and try to apply it to some inane in-joke that we've been running for the past 15 years. I'm not going to do it.
Okay. I'm glad you didn't do it. I'm glad you didn't make the connection.
I needed that validation in my life because you really brought me down when you said I was bad at video games. It's fine when it's coming from me, Mitchell, but obviously my self-esteem is pretty fragile. And what I needed you to do was now, Hyle, you're not that bad. Everybody's good at something.
I have more journalistic integrity than that.
Well, that's why Andy Robinson unfollowed you.
Jesus, okay.
Dr. Puzz. So this is the meat of this video, and I say that as a vegetarian. I usually don't like to make a meat analogy, but this is the bloody meat for our audience. This is the part that matters. So Gary Talbot says he animated Dr. Puzz, and then Gav asked Gary if he knows the relevance of the fish in the fishbowl. Gary does not. He just says he was asked to put a fish in it and make sure it touched the glass. And when he didn't have it touch the glass, Steve Mails went off on him.
Yeah. Good on Steve.
Right there.
Good on Steve and good on Gary for remembering all of that story. And good on Daly for making sure it showed up in the video. That does have implications.
It has implications. Out of respect for Playtonic, we will not get into the implications, but suffice to say, this is something that DK Vine pushed for very hard, and Ed Bryan did do the design of Puzz, so it was nice to know it was a team effort for our benefit and pretty much nobody else's, because really, like, why would they ask for this? And that Steve Mails really wanted it to touch the glass. It did not, but I think developer intention, it was there. That's good enough for me. We've got it. We've got it, people.
Yeah, I think that's pretty solid. Locked and loaded.
Yeah. This pleased me to no end. Although, we found out later in the Moody Maze Marsh video, which I guess we are discussing on the next episode, at the top of the next episode, that Dr. Puzz doesn't have a bowl cut haircut, but is actually wearing a hat. And I find this just completely unbelievable. This is unfathomable to me. How, like, I provided a screenshot from that moment in the video, And I guess I can see that it's a hat, but it really looks like a bowl cut. And that would make sense with the joke of a fishbowl over her head.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't really ring any hat bells for me.
No, it's not like it's a beanie of some sort, maybe, but it looks, I don't know, it looks like there's too much texture, like comb marks in it almost. I mean, I can see it either way, but it's just, for 2 years now, I've just assumed it was a bowl cut and she had purple hair. And now, but I can kind of see like hair underneath the hat, so I guess I see it. It's just, it's like those drawings that when you look at them one way, but you can actually look at them another way. But then when it's pointed out to you, you can like, it just blows your mind. Like the old woman who's actually a young woman.
People thought that the male playable character in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire had white hair for about like more than 10 years. And then when that game was remade, they made the design of the character, it was much more obvious that his white hair was actually a hat over brown hair. And people didn't immediately even agree with the new design being canon because it was so contrary to what they believed.
Well, I'm really glad that this pointless bullshit goes on outside of DK Vine too.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes I worry we take things too far, but arguing about the number of fingers Diddy Kong has and what could be the canon justification for it, it's good to hear that everybody has their thing. So the reason, Mitchell, that I alluded to earlier that I did not like Glitterglaze Glacier was because Icy Metric Palace felt contrary to me at first. I've grown to really appreciate and love that area. But the other thing was the snowplow transformation. And that is because before the Spit and Polish update for Yooka-Laylee, the snowplow had much looser controls than it does now. And if you go back and listen to the Glitterglaze Glacier episode of the Kongversation back in Season 5, you can hear my rants about the plow back in the appropriate time period which they would actually apply. So I'm glad they improved it, because it was my least favorite transformation in the game at the time and really colored my impression of this world. And I hated the plow transformation so much, Mitchell, that one time I had to drive in terrible winter conditions, and I nearly wrecked. Like, my car slid numerous times, did a complete 360 spin. Luckily, I didn't hit anybody. I was fine, but the first thing I did when I was able to get to safety was I tweeted Playtonic just to remind them how much I hated the snowplow. And I think I'm pretty sure Andy Robinson ignored that one, rightfully.
Yeah,
but
he's good at Twitter enough to know which battles are important to fight.
That's how much I despise this transformation. So, oh god, but again, they were cognizant of it, and they actually fixed it in a Spit and Polish update. So no hard feelings. And there is an amusing bit in the video where they have Gary try to jump on the floating helicopter platforms as the plow, and I think very nearly they had recorded him having what almost transpired to be a panic attack. It was
close.
So when I saw that, I'm like, oh, well, I'm not that bad at video games. So Mitchell, I know you put me down earlier, but at the very least, I can jump on those things as the snowplow. So,
okay, could you do it before the Spit and Polish update though?
Well, no, but they're playing it post Spit and Polish update.
Okay,
I did it, but I can definitely do it with ease now.
I'm very proud of you.
They also have Gary attempt car toss, and that does not go well either.
I would watch Gary as challenged. That would be...
Yes.
That would be
good. This was a great idea, and I'm disappointed they haven't actually followed through on it besides when it transpires in these commentaries. Like, I want this to be a real series that they do on their YouTube channel. Gloomy Gem Grotto. Gloomy Gem Grotto, Mitchell, is honestly probably my favorite pure platforming section of Yooka-Laylee. I think it's a really nice showcase of the crisp moves and the gameplay, and I just adore the aesthetic for it in general. Even when I didn't like Glitterglaze Glacier as much as the other worlds, I really liked Gloomy Gem Grotto. I think it reminds me personally, so I live in Virginia, and there is a theme park here called King's Dominion, and it used to be owned by Paramount, and in King's Dominion there used to be an attraction called it's like a Yogi Bear cave, and it was just like this big cave you could explore that was supposed to like belong to Yogi Bear, but it had all these like crystalline structures in the walls that glowed, and it just reminds me of Gloomy Gem Grotto. It takes me back to a happy memory from childhood before the unpleasant times.
Hey,
before I became an
crystals are like everywhere in media, especially with dark caves and stuff. And is there any real life examples of those whatsoever? Are they anywhere, like glowing crystals that can light up a cave? No,
probably
right?
not. No, because I feel like we would have seen those on like desktop wallpapers on our computers.
Why are they so universal? Why does everyone go to that idea?
I think it looks pretty, and it like, why are unicorns a thing? They don't actually exist.
Yeah, but they seem unicorn. I guess dragons would be a better comparison. Like every culture kind of has a dragon. It seems like every culture really likes glowy crystals too.
Yeah,
I bet there's some glowy crystals out there. We just haven't found them yet.
They don't glow as luminous as the ones in our media do, but I'm sure you're right. I'm sure they exist.
I'll go look.
Anyway, not right now. We got to finish this episode.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, but yeah, Gloomy Gem Grotto. I loved it. First playthrough like that was a highlight for me. And they have Gary play this section, and again, it doesn't go well. He fails 7 times, but it was actually 8 by my count. They didn't start the counter until the first time he failed. So, little continuity error there, Playtonic. But I didn't realize that after the Spit and Polish update, they changed it and made it easier. So you didn't need to roll on all of the narrow like pathways that only like certain ones you'd have to roll on. I don't like that they made it easier, Mitchell. I thought it was a perfectly fine challenge the way it was.
I thought what they were saying was that they actually didn't make it easier, but they showed which pathways were too steep to just walk up.
Oh.
So like they changed what it looked like, so it was more easy to tell what you should do at a given point.
Oh, so maybe that's more fair, but I was fine with it the way it was.
Sure.
Yeah. But what I didn't realize though was that the crystals are actually color coded. This completely went over my head. So there's a subtle clue that the red ones are near the ledges to suggest danger, while the blue ones are near the walls. So if you're stumbling around in the dark, you can follow the crystals and almost lead yourself to safety. Didn't realize that. That's a subtle little thing that I don't know if it like actually helps anybody, but interesting to learn all the same. And a fan sent in a question and asked why they had Yooka slurp fireflies to glow in the dark when they have a bat character.
Yeah,
and they could have just used Laylee's echolocation. And that's a good question. I was like, oh damn. The team stated that it might have been discussed, but they wanted to put the focus on Yuka's state changes. So maybe that's something they could work in a sequel, which I guess is a fine answer.
From an in-fiction level, though, I kind of get it, because Yooka is the one walking. So if Laylee sees what's up, she can direct him to a certain degree, but it still needs to be in Yuka's head in order for him to immediately see what he's doing and just like act on it quickly.
That's fine, because again, Yooka is the body that's actually doing most of the legwork, so I think you have to put the agency on Yooka to actually get the job done. Talking about the snowmen of the world, all the snowmen where you had to find their hats. So, interesting thing here that Gav heavily alludes to the idea that they weren't originally snowmen, but they were cursed by someone and became snowmen. Which I'm like, how much lore do you have in your head, Gavin Price, where like only 5% of this ever seems to actually be reflected in the game itself, but you have like entire backstories for all of these ancillary characters that it almost makes my job redundant to have to like figure out how they exist or what their life is outside of this world if Gavin just has entire documents detailing the entire life and times of the third snowman in Glitterglaze Glacier. Like, I'm suitably impressed by all of this, and like, first I couldn't tell if he was bullshitting us or not, but now I'm like definitely sure that he's telling the truth about most of this, that they actually do have ideas for almost all of these characters.
It's cool that he's been able to show enough restraint with like you were saying earlier, it's easy to just write a paragraph for a character to say, right?
Yeah.
So he could have included the whole thing, like, look, we were cursed. It might have even been that witch one of us that did it, because she's a witch. Who knows? Maybe it's a mystery. Like you can't do that when I'm focusing on finding your hats, right?
Right.
It's just this is a hat-based gameplay mechanic right now. Anything more is gonna muddy the waters. So it's good that he didn't just completely go J.K. Rowling about it, and say like, you know, when I was 5, I always loved the cold, but now I can't stand it. And yeah, because you could just be on Twitter all the time just saying the snowmen are actually remnants of age past, like
the snowmen actually used to defecate on the ground in front of everybody.
On the ground, and then they would wave their wands and apparate it away. They were not ashamed. They were just fine with it.
That's the way the cursed snowman culture used to go, and I just said it on Twitter, so therefore it's canon.
Why? Even if you think of that, why let anyone know? Why let anyone know that that's how Hogwarts was? Even if you think of that in your head, and I guess you have to think of it in your head if you're truly going to figure out how everything worked forever. If it's 1,000 years old, that's before plumbing. But why say it? Why say that?
Some say that the pureblood families still do.
There is a funny bit in relation to the snowmen, but beyond their bowel movements, where they realized that the wrong animation was playing on the Indiana Jones styled snowman, the one with the whip, and that it was bowing like the posh snowman is supposed to do. And at this point, Gav freaks out. I really love to see it, like the horror of him realizing, oh my god, this game that has been out for 2 years, we have the wrong animation on the snowman. And then they go visit the pirate snowman, and it does the same thing. It bows.
Yeah, and there's this awkward sense of like, this is funny, and we're talking about it and we're joking, but wow, we actually hate this. We hate that. Yeah. We hate that the animations are mixed up.
I'm sure it was mortifying to realize like this aspect of your game like escaped the eyes of quality control, and it's still in there. And even after your spit and polish update, it was never fixed, and now it's out on 4 platforms, including a fundamentally heavily different Switch version. And we can't fix it. It's too late. It would require too much.
Oh man.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the candid moments like that. Like, that's what makes these worth watching. Like, I cannot do it justice. You just need to watch these videos and watch the horror unfold. It's like it's rubbernecking a car accident. You want to look away because you want to be respectful. You don't want to see any decapitated heads. But secretly, deep down, you kind of want to see a decapitated head.
It's especially funny that this comes after most of this episode of the commentary. Gary Talbot saying, "Oh no, I actually didn't animate that." He's just like talking about various things he didn't animate. So when he got to the first snowman, he's like, "Finally, I can talk about this. Look, I made this animation. In fact, I made all the animations for the snowmen, and they all have the same animation." So it's the one thing he was able to really talk about in the episode.
Also, it bothers me, and this isn't really related to the video so much, but it bothers me that the snowmen don't seem to have official names yet, or at least revealed names. The Yooka-Laylee wiki, which I do check from time to time, it lists the pirate snowman as Shiver E Timbers, which feels like a great name. I don't know if where that comes from. I don't remember that was actually established in game or not. I'm going to trust Yooka-Laylee wiki here, but in the past, DK Vine would have just made up names for them. But I guess we could just ask Daly now. So, hey, Daly, what are the names of the snowmen? Thank you. Get back to us soon.
Hyle, if you were at gunpoint right now and you had to think of a name for the cowboy snowman, what would that name be?
Is it a cowboy or is it an Indiana Jones? Because he has a whip, and the hat doesn't really look like a cowboy hat. It looks like an Indiana Jones. It looks like it could go either way.
Well, he does a bow.
Like I thought that.
So...
Well, okay, but they all do bows. So, like they refer to. Yooka-Laylee Wiki listed as a cowboy snowman, but they refer to it as an adventurer snowman. So the fact that they kept referring to it as an adventurer makes me think Indiana Jones, especially with the prominent whip.
So Indiana Froze?
Harrison Fjord.
Harrison Fjord is very good. Okay, you got it.
Boom! And on that note, we should just wrap this up. So I'm going to end on a high note. Yeah. So, we're going to do Moody Maze Marsh on this episode. We're 3.5 hours in. So next time, we're just going to skip due diligence. We're going to go straight into it cold, like these snowmen, like this world. But it's going to be a swamp, so that won't really apply. We're going to do Moody Maze Marsh and try to get through somehow the entire game, because I refuse to make this a 3-parter. Not when we have so much else to talk about on the Kongversation. God, Mitchell, there's more banging in your attic than a V.C. Andrews novel.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.